Chapter 659. These Gantian mountain people should all die. A furious scolding rang out from within a carriage. This carriage looked really normal but had really luxurious decorations. A middle-aged man in his 30s was looking out of the window in rage. At this moment, on this wide sandy path, there were countless tumbling clouds that were hurrying along. It was currently deep into the night and the middle-aged man was looking at the carriages in front of him. Tens of days ago, these carriages were still under his name. However, now they were occupied by some commoners who ate, drank, and peed on the carriages. This wasn't much. However, thinking about how they didn't have enough carriages and had to throw away large amounts of treasures, the middle-aged man's heart felt pained. He was a merchant who had lived in Yangye City for a long time and his family was really rich. Although Huizhou was in chaos all around. However, relying on those thousands of family generals, they were able to live a good life. However, all of this was totally destroyed half a month ago. First, news of the night demons invading spread which terrified him. It was said that these alien races loved to eat humans. However, in the end, they didn't come. Instead, hundreds of thousands of troops from Gantian Mountains swept over from the east. Then, they attacked all around, forcing everyone, be it rich or poor, old or weak, to the west. Naturally, the Yangye city lord was unwilling. However, this strong army used just a day to break through the city and kill the city lord. In the end, they even broke into his home and took away all the horses and carriages. The strong young men walked on their own while the old and weak took carriages to the west. At this moment, a flame jumped into his field of vision as the carriage got close. The blazing flames became more and more eye-piercing. The flames burned people. From half a mile away they could feel the heat waves. However, they couldn't feel any warmth at all. Without needing to look, one knew that there was a mountain-like amount of grain under the flames. Actually, even if they were chased away by those evil people, there were many people who weren't willing to leave their homes. The Gantian mountain people didn't need to be rough, directly snatching all the grain and burning it. Leave behind only half a month's worth of rations. If you don't leave and can withstand the hunger, then it's up to you. He himself was like this. Whenever he thought of the 7 million granaries in his family that had been reduced to ashes, he felt an indescribable pain in his heart. At this moment, many people could be seen crying loudly in the distance, and there was no lack of people cursing. However, the soldier beside the fire didn't move at all. He still stood there coldly with a sharp blade in his hand, preventing these people from approaching. This scene was vaguely similar. 10 days ago, he had done the same thing. Bah! They're all cowards. Why don't you fight them with your life? The middle-aged man spat on the ground again, feeling even more resentful. However, he only dared to say these words. At that time, although there were more than 1,000 family generals, they still didn't dare to resist. These Gantian mountain soldiers were all vicious and merciless. As long as someone made a move, the counterattack would be extremely fierce. Along the way, he'd already seen quite a few examples, and all of them were clans that had been annihilated, causing him to feel extremely fortunate. At this moment, he was shocked, only to feel dozens of cold gazes looking over at him. Frowning, the middle-aged man didn't need to look to know what was going on. Those were the people who returned from Lianyan Island. At that time, Yangye City Lord wanted to recruit strong men, and it was said that he wanted to send them to the east to do manual labor, and the pay was huge. As a tycoon, he naturally knew what was going on. As his family had thousands of servants, they were given hundreds of spots. At that time, he acted like he didn't know and sent some arrogant and unruly servants over. However, he didn't expect that these people would be able to return. Did they want his life? The middle-aged man laughed coldly, but in the end, he retracted his head back into the carriage. Then, he heard a trembling voice. This Gantian mountain is so cruel to the people, going against the natural order. How can such a tyrant not be punished by the heavens? I should write a letter to my old colleagues to ask the Taishang Emperor to send troops to suppress them and bring order to the chaos. We are immoral to allow such a tyrant to be born in the world. Is this the punishment of the heavens? Looking in the direction of the voice, he saw an old Confucian in a sorry state, rambling endlessly. The middle-aged man laughed coldly. He knew that this person was a student of a central continent Confucian, and it was said that he was a Xiao. It was said that he came to Huizhou to spread the teachings of the Confucian school of thought and accepted the invitation of Yangye City Lord. However, during these few years, this person had taken in numerous students, but Yangye City didn't change much. Instead, that family became more and more rich. Now, it was all for naught, and they were in the same boat. That Gantian mountain monster king was naturally a tyrant. However, for the Taishang Emperor to send troops to suppress them was just wishful thinking. Shaking his head, the middle-aged man frowned and then sighed. Now, it was up to the few large countries in the West whether or not they could block them. A month ago, when the 300,000 Gantian mountain troops came from the east, they didn't care. He didn't pay much attention to it, but he didn't expect that in the end, it would be a complete sweep. From east to west there were dozens of battles, and they won each one. Like the autumn wind sweeping the fallen leaves, they occupied 2 provinces of land. They also took in millions of surrendered troops. The Huizhou city lords didn't care at first, but in the end they panicked. They went from doing their own things to working together. However, until now they were still unable to stop their troops, and they were still retreating. Yangye City was taken down because the alliance army was defeated. There were also many people who hoped that the 3 sects of Huizhou would step out. However, what made them panic was that until now, there were no signs of these people. Even their family members were nowhere to be seen. At this moment, there were already 2 million alliance army troops in the west. However, in his eyes, they didn't have a high chance of winning. Ren Tianxing, muttering out this name, the middle-aged man sighed heavily, frowning and not saying a word. The current Gantian mountain commander was called Zhonggang, and he was really famous in Donglin. However, the one who left the deepest impression on him was still this person. This person should be the main general of the Gantian mountain army. During this month, most of the big and small battles came from this person. Each time he won with fewer people, and his 150,000 men were invincible everywhere he went. That day when the Yangye city lord was defeated, he had personally witnessed it. At that time, he felt that his mind was shaken, especially by the 20,000 swordsmen in red armor and the 20,000 crossbowmen. Their sharpness were frightening. 500,000 troops were defeated in just 3 drums, throwing away their armor, and tens of thousands died. This was why when his grain was burned, he didn't have any intention to fight back. Now, 6 provinces had been broken through. Although there were still 2 million alliance army troops in the west, in his eyes they were most probably going to lose. Logically speaking, he should be depressed. However, for some reason, a gloating feeling rose up in his heart. My family was destroyed, so how can you all be left alone? At this moment, Ren Tianxing didn't know that when people were thinking about him, they were having such dark thoughts. At this moment, he was frowning as he looked forward. Countless tents were densely packed on the hills in the distance. With 6 people in each tent, there were at least 700,000 troops in the camp. The Huizhou army wasn't as weak as people thought. After all, this place was a chaotic place where only the strong could survive. In his eyes, the soldiers here were much stronger than those in the Taishang core area. People thought that the Taishang was strong, but they didn't know that it had been peaceful for too long. Apart from the border army being elites, the troops in the core area had long decayed. Naturally, if it was during normal times, he wouldn't bother about these 700,000 people. However, at this moment, he saw deep trenches and high walls, a bow every 10 steps, a crossbow every 3 steps. The entire camp was like a porcupine. For 2 full days, these 700,000 Alliance army troops defended here, not giving him a chance to fight in the wild. Even with Ren Tianxing's calmness, he couldn't help but feel anxious. Who knows what the ruler's situation was like? Could he hold on? Would the troops under him be able to rush back in time? If what he expected was right, the final battle of Seven Cloud Mountain would happen soon. If they continued to waste time here, it would really be too late. This should be the final battle, but they were stuck here and couldn't move an inch forward. Actually, it wasn't that they couldn't forcefully break through. Ren Tianxing's eyes looked to the left, only to see 20,000 swordsmen in red heavy armor, as well as 20,000 soldiers holding crossbows, lined up in an orderly manner at the side. Their armor was clean and tidy, but it gave one a thick blood stench. The bright red armor looked like blood. They had gone through dozens of battles, killing millions, and were undefeatable. Only then did they develop such an invincible and overbearing aura, as well as that thick killing intent. These were the newly formed Big Dipper sword soldiers and Big Dipper crossbow soldiers. It was said that they were modeled after ancient Qin, and were elite troops above the Gantian wind-splitting Mo knife soldiers. He also didn't expect that Kong Yao would toss these elite troops that were only weaker than the Blood Cloud cavalry to him. However, at that time, the so-called elite troops of the 4 towns were all lax and weak. Apart from morale, they had nothing good about them. To be able to train the troops of the 4 towns to such a state in a short 2 months, it was soaked in his blood and sweat. If the Big Dipper sword soldiers forcefully broke through, they would definitely be able to break this camp. However, if that happened, the elite troops under him would definitely be wiped out. Looking at Kong Yao's intentions, it seemed like she had a lot of expectations for him. If the casualties were too heavy, it wouldn't be what she wanted. Thinking about it in his heart, Ren Tianxing thought about Zhang Huai. That day when they were splitting the west conquering troops, although Kong Yao made Zhonggang the commander, she also moved his junior brother Zhang Huai over to Huizhou to be his assistant. That was what he liked. Every time Zhonggang went to war, he would be really valiant. However, to lead an army to attack cities and defend against millions of enemies wasn't what he was good at. With Zhang Huai at the side giving advice and helping to plan, it made him feel at ease. It was the same during these few days. As the commander, Zhonggang was more like the vanguard than him, attacking west without caring about anything. On the contrary, Zhang Huai was at the back, coordinating the battle situation. However, half a day ago, this fellow said that he was going to use his glib tongue to convince the Huizhou natives to surrender. Then, he didn't bother to stop him, running to the opposite camp alone. Who knows how he was doing now? Chapter 660. Standing tall on the horse, Ren Tianxing closed his eyes and waited quietly. An hour quietly passed. However, there was still no sound from the camp opposite them. Ren Tianxing couldn't help but open his eyes filled with worry. He was really clear about his junior brother's ability. Even if he couldn't convince those city lords to change sides, he could retreat safely. However, there wasn't much time left. If 2 more hours and Zhang Huai still hadn't returned, then he would have to face the consequences. If that happened, then he would have to prepare to forcefully attack. A thunder-like horse hooves sound spread out in his ears. Ren Tianxing turned around only to see a bunch of cavalry galloping over. He couldn't help but be shocked. He didn't see Zhang Huai but Zhonggang did. "Greetings, Inspector." He immediately bowed, only to see that Zhonggang's back was covered in blood. It was obvious that he had just gone through a huge battle not long ago. Ren Tianxing thought about it and knew what was going on. Did the surrendered troops betray us? That's right. The surrendered troops of the few southwest cities colluded and wanted to stab me from behind. These brats are so dishonest. He muttered and scolded. Then, Zhonggang didn't care. However, it is okay. Send them all to the east. At that time, they have no choice but to fight. Ren Tianxing shook his head slightly. Actually, at this moment they were surrounded by danger. There were close to 2 million surrendered troops under their control, amongst which there were those who were truly loyal to Gantian Mountain and wanted a future. There were also those who were waiting for a chance. There was also grain. They traveled light and relied on pillaging. Although they burned a lot, the army didn't have much grain stored up. There weren't many refugees left. If they couldn't win this battle, then the situation would be worrying. They are guarding my side like an iron bucket. There is no chance to break that turtle shell. I could only let Lingxian take over as the commander to take a look at you. There was a hint of intimacy in his voice. Although they hadn't known each other for long, Zhong Gang's personality was just like that. He admired people who were strong and could fight. Moreover, this person was Rumbua's nephew. How is the situation here? I will definitely be able to break it within a day. He was a man of few words, but his words were resolute and decisive. Following which, Ren Tianxing still looked towards the camp. However, Counselor Zhang said that there's no need to waste any effort in this battle, and that a few words will be enough to settle the situation. Zhong Gang was startled, thinking that there was such a thing. Naturally, Zhang Huai was referring to Zhang Huai. Although this person was a little delicate, he was also quite a character to his liking. It was all because of this person that he was able to ignore all those trivial matters and fight to his heart's content these days. In the next instant, a figure walked out from the tent on the east side of the opposite camp. His face was filled with a gentle smile. Although he was in front of the two armies, he walked calmly, neither fast nor slow. From afar, it was none other than Zhang Huai. Just as he walked 5,000 feet out of the camp, a voice rang out. Within the camp, several places were instantly lit up with flames. A series of battle cries soared into the sky. The seemingly sturdy camp was instantly thrown into chaos. Ren Tianxing's brow rose up. It really succeeded? He instantly heaved a sigh of relief. However, Ren Tianxing knew that this wasn't the time to hesitate and be happy. He pointed forward with the horsewhip, order the evil-suppressing army 5 towns to move forward and assume a strong attacking posture. The rest of the army prepare armor and follow me to attack. As soon as the order was given, the entire army formation rumbled with the sound of battle. Zhong Gang listened on at the side and found it weird. At this moment, the chaos in the camp mostly came from the east, which was the enemy opposite the 5 towns. However, listening to Zhong Shou's words, it seemed like he wasn't going to attack from the east. Thinking about it, Zhong Gang knew the reason. The east was in chaos and there was an enemy attacking. If he was the enemy general, he would go all out to suppress the chaos in the camp. However, with that, the other places would be empty. Avoiding the main force and attacking the weak? Letting the rebel army bear the pressure would also reduce the casualties of his subordinate. This fellow really planned it well. However, Zhong Gang's eyes were filled with admiration. This kid's ability to use troops and also knew how to protect the soldiers under him. He was indeed much stronger than him. Moments later, Zhang Huai was still walking there, who knew how long it would take for him to reach the front of the army formation. Zhong Gang was impatient and decided to ride his horse over. Then, he asked curiously, "Kid, how did you do it?" "This matter is simple, I just used land to tempt them." Zhang Huai smiled. This was indeed a really normal play. The 6 provinces have no ruler and who knows how many people are eyeing them. How many people wouldn't care about the temptation of a city and a land? Even if those city lords weren't tempted, their subjects might be tempted. Ren Tianxing's pupils constricted when he heard that, his brows furrowed. These indecisive and disloyal people won't be easy to control in the future. He said seriously, "The ruler is the one who controls the land. We can't go beyond that." Zhang Huai smiled and handed over a piece of bright yellow silk. Ren Tianxing took a look. It was Zhong Shou's decree. It was signed a few months ago. The meaning of the decree was that he could let Zhang Huai do whatever he wanted. Did the ruler expect this? Ren Tianxing's nervous heart was finally at ease. What he was most worried about was that Zhang Huai didn't know how to control himself and draw suspicion. Then, he abruptly turned around and let out a loud roar that reverberated for 5 kilometers. Fellow comrades, today, we just need to trample this formation and we can return to fight alongside the ruler. Are you all willing to follow me to break the formation? The hundreds of thousands of people in the formation were first silent. Then, there was a roar like that of a tsunami. Return. Fight to the death. Break the formation. The voices of hundreds of thousands of people gathered into one and shook the clouds. Following which, Ren Tianxing looked back at Zhang Huai. I will have to trouble junior brother. Zhang Huai understood and knew that Ren Tianxing wasn't entrusting him with the formation-breaking battle. Instead, it was after the Gantian mountain army returned. At that time, he would only have a few trustworthy towns under him. However, he would have to suppress the entire 10 provinces of Huizhou. It was indeed a huge headache. At the same time, 10,000 miles away, numerous sword light and knife shadows flew about in the east of Huizhou. Thousands of streaks of light crisscrossed in the sky, almost tearing the clouds apart. Within 1,000 miles there were no birds. Only the blade light of the two of them were clashing and striking. Countless crimson electric arcs spread out in all directions, enveloping the entire sky. However, within this red dipper divine lightning, there was a black electric current that was tightly wrapped into a ball. Although it was slightly weaker, it was able to defend and didn't show any signs of weakness. Behind Zhongshou, there was a pair of black wings that were 30,000 feet long. Each time it flapped, it would draw over large amounts of heaven and earth spiritual energy. Grade 5 and below spells were formed around him in an instant. He continued to bombard the area in front of him. Even if they couldn't harm the enemy, it would be good if they could distract the enemy. The nameless sword in his hand shone brightly as he slashed down without any exhaustion. 3 feet in front of him was Prince Jia Mingluo's body. The two of them were in close combat, their bodies intersecting and splitting up. If one was slightly weaker or slightly slower, one would be instantly slashed down. At this moment, Zhongshou's advantage in sword path attainments had been reduced to the lowest. He relied more on his own instincts. The speed of their swords had exceeded the limit of one's thinking speed. Most of the time, before one's brain made a judgment, the body would naturally react. He was a strong enemy. Since the first time they clashed, Zhongshou knew that Prince Jia Mingluo was tough to deal with. However, the feeling was even deeper now. He avoided his weaknesses, causing his advantage in sword path to be totally gone. He also didn't have a chance to use the 6-god flying knife. However, fighting with this person, the effect of body training was much stronger than using iron sand to train. He also went all out. It seemed like an enemy of such a level would understand his weaknesses better than him. Zhongshou laughed, finding it weird that he was still thinking about all this at such a time. This was the 37th time the two of them had clashed in these 3 months. It was still a stalemate. Prince Jia Mingluo had a huge advantage, but was still unable to take him down. Naturally, Zhongshou couldn't find any chance of winning from start to finish. However, if this went on, in just a few days, his martial path would improve and he would step into grade 9. During these few days, the gains from the dozens of sword battles, under the suppression of Prince Jia Mingluo's spirit realm strength, his gains in the sword path, it far exceeded that day when he fought against the 6 of them in the deep lake. Originally, due to the huge improvement in his cultivation, he was slowly unable to control his strength. Now, he was able to precisely control each bit of his strength, able to use it as he wished. Compared to Zhongshou, who was at a disadvantage but was still calm and composed. At this moment, Prince Jia Mingluo's chest was filled with anxiousness. His eyes were filled with rage, the vital energy in his body was burning and being pushed to the peak. His strength was much higher than Zhong Shou, but he only missed by a little and couldn't kill him. Suddenly, 1 gold and 1 silver, 2 silver lights flew over. A bone-chilling, killing intent appeared in the depths of Prince Jia Mingluo's eyes. He knew that these were Zhong Shou's 2 spiritual beasts. He also had such protector beasts. However, the beasts under his control might be much stronger, but they couldn't compare to his flying speed. Who knew what species they were? Although one was grade 8 and one was grade 9. However, even the 2 divine beast subspecies that he treasured the most were inferior in terms of speed. At this moment, these 2 beasts could be said to be controlling the battle between him and the Gantian Mountain Monster King. Most of the time, they were on the ground in his army, killing all around. Then, in just 4 to 6 hours, they would bring many of their race souls and fly to Zhong Shou's side. Then, suddenly, the Gantian Mountain Monster King's soul power would increase. That spiritual power would also strengthen by close to double. Chapter 661. After fighting for a day and night, Zhong Shou's spells were pretty much limitless. Who knows where this kid got so much soul power from? Did he really draw it from the souls of his fellow race members? What kind of secret technique was this? As expected, just as the golden and silver fist-sized glow landed on Zhong Shou was stunned. Suddenly, black flames swept the sky. Suddenly, the black lightning exploded and blazed. Suddenly, the red star god lightning around exploded and scattered in all directions. In an instant, the battle situation started to turn around. Samuraim's gaze sharpened and there was a dragon roar behind him as a 7-claw giant dragon appeared. That green sword light also charged forward, increasing its speed by several times in an instant, piercing forward like a torrential storm. Jia Mingluo's face was also filled with a vicious expression. In his life, he had never known how to retreat. However, at this moment, when he faced this sword, he instinctively felt terrified and his hair stood up. He instinctively didn't want to take the hit. However, after a short moment, he suppressed this trace of fear. The heavy blade in his hand didn't even think as he gathered all the strength in his body and slashed down. Great Spirit Domain Blade. If this blade couldn't be broken and blocked, then he would die. Hong. There was a loud explosion like the heavens were collapsing and the earth was cracking. All the clouds within 5,000 kilometers were violently pushed away by an invisible force. Zhong Shou's 1,000-sword shadows were all gathered on one point of Jia Mingluo's blade. It was endless. That huge strength was unable to be released as it was slowly dissipated by the impact. In the end, the back of the blade was bent. His entire body had no choice but to retreat thousands of feet. However, Zhong Shou wasn't having a good time either. Half of the green fire in his sea of soul had already been consumed by this attack. A portion of the blade power that Jia Mingluo slashed over couldn't be resolved. It charged into his body and spread about, causing his chakra meridians to be damaged and his aura to be in chaos. Although Jia Mingluo was slightly injured, he was heavily injured and had no strength to chase after him. He wasn't a free and easy person. He felt a little regretful that the killing blow that he had planned for a long time had failed on the verge of success. However, he didn't care at all. The battle with Jia Mingluo wouldn't be decided in a short period of time. There was still a long way to go. Suddenly, Zhong Shou raised his eyebrows and looked to the east. They saw a ball of rising sun, and beams of sunlight shone down. He couldn't help but laugh. It is already morning. Does Prince Jia Mingluo still want to fight? Prince Jia Mingluo's image was very small during the day, but his strength was somewhat suppressed, especially at noon. If this person really did not want to give up, Zhong Shou would be more than happy to oblige. Perhaps he might have a chance to kill this person. At that time, although there were 1,000,000 night demons, they would not be a problem. Jia Mingluo's face was ashen green. He looked at his right hand, which was holding the saber, and saw that his arm, which was originally extremely stable, was trembling slightly. This was because he had used up all his strength. With his strength, he would be able to recover in just a dozen breaths. However, what was the point of fighting now? Before this, he had used half a night to accumulate the advantage, forcing Zhong Shou to the brink. However, this person managed to turn the situation around with that sword. Even if he continued to fight, it would be useless. He had tried before, relying on his recovery ability that was close to 10 times stronger than Zhong Shou's to wear down his internal energy. However, in the end, it was to no avail. After several days of intense fighting, he was the one who was about to run out of energy. Not only did this person have endless soul power, but even his internal energy was the same. There seemed to be a whirlpool on Zhong Shou's sword. Each time they clashed, he would feel like his energy was being sucked away and then bounced back. He frowned and looked closely at Zhong Shou. In the end, he spat out a mouthful of turbid air, his expression slowly calming down. What has ruler thought about the discussion a day ago? If you are willing to join my race, not only will your Gantian Mountain and Donglin Cloud Continent be safe, even this Huizhou Island can be given to you. With your talent and strength, Father will definitely put you in an important position. In the future, helping my race to rule this world might be possible. Zhong Shou's lips curled up. Why was he trying to persuade him to surrender again? He didn't even think and directly shook his head. You are really annoying. Jia Mingluo's face turned green once more. Then, he laughed coldly. In 3 months, you retreated from Lianyun to here, losing 10 out of 10 battles. How long can you last with your few 100,000 people? His tone became gentler. If you aren't willing to serve my race, then it is okay. As long as ruler is willing to give way and retreat to Donglin. I can guarantee that within 30 years, I won't touch a single blade of grass in Donglin. When he said these words, it was extremely difficult. During these 3 months, be it on the battlefield or the intense battles between the two of them, they had gone through numerous battles. He was afraid of the resilience of the person in front of him. He was defeated but didn't give up, like he was an unbreakable rock that couldn't be smashed. Zhong Shou kept silent. When they were on Lianyun Island, even after splitting up, there were around 1,200,000 of them. In the next 3 months, they added many more. However, today there were only 70% of them left. This was also because the night demons weren't willing to expend too much energy and didn't go all out to attack. Naturally, the ones remaining under his command were the true elites who had survived the Azura battlefield. As for how long they could last, Zhong Shou himself wasn't confident. However, he still smiled. Then, Zhong Shou, may I ask how many days of food Prince Jia Mingluo has left? Do you want to borrow some from me? Jia Mingluo's breathing instantly became much heavier. The food he brought over to the cloud world was enough for 10 million people to use. However, most of it was lost in the world river. Originally, he didn't care. As long as he plundered around after entering the cloud world, it would be fine. Who knew that the army would be blocked in front of this extremely steep mountain range? Within 10,000 miles, there was no one. There was no one around, and there were very few things that could be used as food. Today, his army relied on hunting beasts to replenish their food. However, as time went on, within 1,000 miles, there were no birds or beasts, and it was getting harder and harder to find them. This was because they didn't have enough manpower to hunt them. Although Zhong Shou's army was getting smaller and smaller, at every moment, they had enough strength to fight back. Like a spring, the tighter it was, the stronger the rebound force would be. Even with 1 million night demon troops attacking, they didn't dare to relax. The thing that they didn't care about the most now became a huge problem that could cause them to collapse. You are asking to die. He knew that there was no point in saying anything more, so he scoffed coldly and waved his sleeves to leave. Before he left, he took a deep look at the blood-colored cavalry below. This was the Blood Cloud Cavalry, the elite cavalry of Gantian Mountain, that gave him the biggest headache. As long as they appeared on the battlefield, they would be able to turn the tides and sweep everything in their path. This time, there were close to 10 spirit realm experts who followed him to the cloud world. However, they were all unable to move because of this blood-colored cavalry. If not for the presence of these powerhouses, a single cavalry unit would have been able to crush the night demon army of hundreds of thousands. There was also a general who was unparalleled in formation charging and had a really sharp grasp of timing. This caused him to set up several traps to try to kill them, but they were all easily broken by the blood cloud cavalry. At this moment, in front of the cavalry formation, there was a young general who was holding a halberd. He raised his head and his eyes were filled with disdain. Although Jia Mingluo didn't care, he still felt stuffy in his chest. Suppressing the killing intent that rose up in his heart, he flapped his wings and flew down towards the retreating army in the east. Within 10 days I will break this mountain. At that time, let's hope that ruler can still laugh. Zhong Shou was speechless when he heard that. Who knows how many times this fellow said such vicious words after each battle. Why did he say it again? However, in his heart, he felt a little heavier. He could hear the unprecedented decisiveness in his tone. He was probably forced to the extreme. In the past, this person was always worried about casualties. This was why each time he needed to break through, he would stop. If he didn't go all out now, defeat would be right in front of him. Once this night demon army went all out, the power that exploded out would definitely be shocking. He frowned. However, in the next moment, Zhong Shou had an idea. He reached out and a ball of white energy appeared in his hand. The aura was shocking, like it was the gathering of millions of thoughts. This was the strength of the King Path. However, at this moment, it was much stronger than when he was fighting Prince Jia Mingluo. Without needing to think, Zhong Shou knew that Zhong Gang and Ren Tianxing had broken through. How quick! He remembered that the report from yesterday said that they were facing off against the 2 million Alliance army in the west. How did they break through at this moment? The King Path martial art was the gathering of the strength of a country. With that, did the entire Huizhou fall under his rule? They had no way to fight back? However, he didn't feel much joy. Although they won this battle, there might be some benefits to this side, but it was really little. How could they rush back so easily from 10,000 miles away? Even if they did, they would be exhausted. At most, when they fought Prince Jia Mingluo, it would be much easier. Shaking his head, Zhong Shou flew down. Not long later, he returned to his tent. It was built on the peak of the mountain and one could look out over 1,000 miles, only to see that the entire battlefield was really desolate. All the grass and trees were gone, only a white land was left. Countless stone walls crisscrossed below. There were also hundreds and thousands of stone castles standing on it. These were all built by Kong Yao, who recruited the people around. Along with the 8 million who were lucky enough to survive, it took close to a month and a half to build. As the night demons had wings, these stone castles weren't too tall. The top layer was sealed, but they were all really firm. Those stone walls weren't used to block the enemy, but to cover the spiritual formation. There were also numerous parts of the 7-Cloud Mountain that were hollowed out to set up crossbows. However, looking at it now, a large portion of the stone walls that were built up had collapsed. A small portion of the thousands of stone castles were broken through and turned into flat land. Zhong Shou couldn't help but keep silent. If they continued to fight, they would really have no way to defend. Chapter 662. Just as he entered the tent, Zhong Shou saw Kong Yao standing beside the map, frowning as she looked at it. She was so focused that even when Zhong Shou entered, she didn't notice. Zhong Shou smiled when he saw that. Just as he was about to open his mouth to ask, he was startled. He only felt that the current Kong Yao was really fresh and cute, her cheeks flushed red and it tugged at his heartstrings. His nose sniffed and he could smell a faint fragrance. 2 words flashed across his mind. A beauty like jade, a lotus flower out of the water. He then smelled his body. After grade 7, his body had been refined and was extremely clean. However, he couldn't drop a single feather and add a single speck of dust. However, after these few months of intense battles, he didn't have time to think about other things. At this moment, there was a sour and bloody smell on his body that was really unpleasant. He instantly scoffed as Zhong Shou shook his head. In the end, she was a woman. Even if she was a future top commander, she couldn't be as careless as a man and bear with such a smell. However, this body fragrance was really nice to smell. Standing beside the map, Zhong Shou's nose twitched as he took in a deep breath. At this moment, Kong Yao finally noticed his arrival. Her face instantly flushed red. Just now, I took the time to make a trip to Jilua Lake. Ruler, don't worry, everything has been arranged. Jilua Lake? Zhong Shou didn't understand. Why was Kong Yao telling him all this? Did she have to report to him where she bathed? In the next instant, he suddenly thought about it. Wasn't this Jilua Lake near Seven Cloud Mountain? Roughly 2,000 miles away, it was a huge lake that had 300,000 people from north to south. When he heard the last sentence, his heart jumped. Has everything been arranged properly? What needed to be arranged? Speaking of which, during these days, if he wasn't fighting with Prince Jia Mingluo, he was in secluded meditation to heal up. As for how Kong Yao used troops and how she planned to defeat the enemy, he didn't bother much about it. He looked at Kong Yao with a questioning gaze, but she lowered her head again, not intending to continue paying attention to him. Zhong Shou was speechless. What was he trying to do? Or was this a test for him, the monarch? Suddenly, a few footsteps were heard as he walked out of the tent with a majestic gait. Looking up at the sky, he saw balls of light shining down from the eastern horizon. The entire Seven-Cloud Mountain was enveloped in the seven-colored light. It added a dreamy feeling to this bloody and oppressive battlefield. Startled, Zhong Shou seemed to have thought of something. Suddenly, his laughter shook the heavens, filled with endless joy. The worries in his heart were all gone, and he felt incomparably comfortable and fortunate. He felt that the wisest thing he had done in his life was to poach Kong Yao to his side. He suddenly turned around, his eyes filled with anticipation as he said, "So, this battle is already decided?" "Not necessarily." Kong Yao shook her head. "It still depends on whether or not you and I can force these night demons to fight in the day. It is best if it is noon." Zhong Shou laughed and looked down the mountain, only to see those night demons retreating like a flood, entering a camp covered in black mist. It was like that every day. A few days ago, Kong Yao had also tried to counterattack during the day. Unfortunately, not only were these night demons unaffected by the black fog, their strength had even increased by 30%. Since her attempt didn't work, Kong Yao decisively gave up, only defending those stone castles. To force these night demons to fight to the death in the day, unless they were really at their wits' end. Squinting his eyes, Zhong Shou's expression returned to normal. Although he was still excited, it slowly calmed down. As expected, he couldn't be careless in this battle. However, his heart wasn't as tense as before. Although the situation was perilous, there was still hope. If they could win this battle, then they would be able to kill 1,000,000 and settle the entire situation. Taking in a deep breath, Zhong Shou mocked himself. "It isn't easy for you. What plans do you have?" Kong Yao smiled and didn't reply, passing a few message talismans over. Zhong Shou took them in his hands and moments later, his brow rose up. One of them came from Zhonggang. What was written within was that the battle in the west had ended in a huge victory. The only thing he didn't expect was that Ren Tianxing would start to gather carriages and all the grade 2 mounts in Huizhou. It is estimated that by tonight, they would be able to send 150,000 elite cavalry and 200,000 elite infantry to reinforce Seven Cloud Mountain. Within 3 days, there would be 2 million people who would be able to set off. Zhong Shou calculated. If that was true, the 350,000 troops would be able to rush back to Seven Cloud Mountain in 3 days. For the current battle situation, it was like sending charcoal in the snow. No wonder Kong Yao was so confident. The second message talisman came from Admiral Gu Laikong. The rough idea was that although the situation was tough and they suffered heavy losses, they could still restrict the few spaceships of the Night Demon race. However, the time was only limited to a month. Only the last piece of news made Zhong Shou frown. Gu Laikong actually made the decision to give Shi Rulan a few five-toothed turreted ship. He wanted her to stay by Gu Liekong's side. However, the goal was to let Shi Rulan learn some experience. He didn't expect her to lead troops now. What was going on with this Gu Laikong? However, he suppressed the worry in his heart. Gu Laikong wasn't a rash person. He definitely had his reasons for doing such things. He definitely wouldn't be so careless just to suck up to the ruler. Following which, he started to calculate. At this moment, even if the Night Demon race wasn't at the end of their rope, they were pretty far away. A month should be enough. Unable to use those spaceships to pillage and unable to find a way in the Cloud Ocean, the Night Demons could only turn their attention to land. They could only fight to the death with him here. However, this was far from enough. In the next moment, he saw Kong Yao point at Yitu Mountain. I am afraid that the surrendered troops are unsettled. Even if it is for their home, they might not be able to fight to the death. Which is why I want to destroy this place in 7 days. Does ruler think that is possible? Samuraim's eyes shrunk. Where Kong Yao was pointing at was beside Seven Cloud Mountain, the path that led to the core of Huizhou. If this path was cut off, then the retreat path of the millions of troops here would be totally cut off. Was she trying to live from the brink of death? With a thought, Zhong Shou laughed out loud. Why not? During the Cloud Desolate era, there were battles with their backs to the river, and there were battles with all their means of retreat. 10,000 years later, couldn't Zhong Shou fight with his back to the mountain? Speaking of which, Kong Yao, you predicted that the date of the final battle would be 7 days later? Kong Yao hesitated slightly and then nodded. That's right. Then we will do as you say. Zhong Shouxin was stunned for a moment before he picked up the last message talisman. This one came from Gantian Mountains Rinhua. He said that the Taishang had sent an envoy to ask him about killing Weihai and snatching his army. He couldn't help but scoff coldly as he looked towards the east. Since the Night Demons invaded, Kong Yao had led the army on his behalf. In 3 months they had fought over 30 battles, going against 2 million Night Demons. Although they were forced back, they didn't scatter. At this moment, even a blind person could see that Kong Yao had the ability to lead an army. Although she followed the rules, she took care of all aspects. She coordinated the troops and didn't make any mistake. She managed the entire Huizhou war situation and was still really calm. She wasn't leading tens of thousands of troops to charge and break through enemy lines. She was leading millions of people to attack and destroy countries. Although she was still a little rusty, the future army god was starting to take shape. In the future, she would be a giant pillar that could support a country. Who knows if the Taishang Emperor City person who personally handed Kong Yao to him regretted it. He was probably going to spit out blood with a heh. Zhong Shou smiled in delight and shattered the message talisman. To him, these questions were neither painful nor itchy. He just needed to send some gifts and send an envoy to apologize after this battle. It would give them a way out and he would be able to turn this storm into nothing. It wasn't that he looked down on them, but that the Zhongyuan Emperor dynasty had always been like this. If they were helpless, they would just calm them down. He also saw through Emperor Yuanshan and knew that he needed to calm down. There were many aristocratic families in the country, and the prophecy said that the God Emperor would appear. Why would this saint ruler come to find trouble with him at such a time? At the end of the message talisman, It mentioned that Donglin Cloud Continent had been in chaos recently. Some city lords were really restless. Some people of unknown identities were running all about. However, these people were much smarter now. Before the situation was settled, they wouldn't raise the flag of rebellion. With Gantian Mountain and 3 million elites suppressing, they didn't dare to act recklessly. Ruoxue had mentioned this matter to him not long ago, which was why he wasn't shocked. At such a stage, even those close to him wouldn't have high hopes for him. Common people's vast habitat and the 3 sects and 6 schools had sent him letters several times asking if he needed help. His friends and family were like that. Much less these enemies in the dark? They were probably thinking that even if Zhong Shou could safely retreat from Huizhou, he would definitely suffer heavy losses. Shaking his head, Zhong Shou looked coldly at the map. 7 days later? Let's see who wins and loses 7 days later. Who would be in charge of the east of the cloud world? 15 minutes ago, just as Zhong Shou landed from the sky and returned to 7 Cloud Peak, Hu Zhongyuan stood at the highest point of a broken castle and looked up. Seeing that body land safely, he retracted his gaze. Then, he scolded out, "That Jia Mingluo really doesn't know when to stop." They knew that Zhong Shou's safety was at stake and they couldn't make any mistakes. However, he couldn't interfere at all in the battle between the two of them. He also knew that Zhong Shou was using his own strength to protect this place, close to 1 million troops. He didn't allow Jia Mingluo to do whatever he wanted. It was just that every time there was a fierce battle in the sky, it made him feel anxious. He couldn't help but feel dejected. His talents were still a little too weak, and he couldn't help Zhong Shou. Chai Zhou beside him didn't think so much. With Zhong Yuan supporting us, why do we need to worry? He looked outside of the castle. Although the Night Demon army had retreated, there were many injured soldiers. Under the threat of the crossbows, they weren't able to save them. Chai Zhou's eyes instantly turned sharp. How should we deal with the people outside? Chapter 663. How should we deal with those outside? His tone was calm, but it was filled with coldness. Hu Qianxiu leaped onto the parapet of the stone castle, and then spat out. What else can we do? Same old rules. Didn't the ruler say that it is best if those fellows have no way out? We can't be careless. Chai Zhou knew that this would happen, smiling slightly and nodding towards the few generals behind him. Moments later, a large group of men and horses were chased out of the city. The style of their armor wasn't the red of Gantian Mountain but the pure black of the Taishang army. Thousands of people were chased out to search for those night demons who still had a chance to live, killing them one by one. 50 to 60 of them attacked together and chopped them into meat paste. At the same time, furious roars could be heard coming from the giant black mist, followed by sharp murderous intents. Hu Zhongyuan laughed coldly, not bothering at all. He waited quietly for a moment and seeing that there was still no movement, he shook his head in disappointment. It seems like today's matter is over. These useless things. In the past, each time he ordered the surrendered troops to slaughter the injured night demons, they would occasionally strike out in the day. That was the situation he loved the most. Each time it happened, the night demons would suffer heavy casualties. However, in the recent 2 months, such good things rarely happened. Sighing softly, Hu Zhongyuan looked at the dilapidated fortress beneath him. The protective spiritual array was almost completely destroyed. This stone castle was mostly flattened by the siege machines of the night demons. If they defended, they could still last for half a day. However, if they continued to stay in the stone castle at night, they would be asking to die. Prepare to abandon the castle. Let the spirit masters work harder to level this place. Although it was a broken structure, if it fell into the hands of the night demons, it would be a problem. Chai Zhou's pupils constricted as he looked behind him. At this moment, although there were still 300 stone castles left, they were spread out on a 100-mile battle line. They vaguely formed 3 lines, blocking the foot of the 7 Extremes mountain. During these few days, the night demons would break through a layer of their defensive line every 2 days. 2 days to break through a formation if we retreat from here again. In at most 6 days, these night demons would reach the foot of the Seven Extremes mountain. It's Kong Yao's idea. They say that our people are worth more than the land, Hu Zhongyuan snorted. He was still not used to calling that woman inspector of the left. However, after a few months of continuous fighting, he had already acknowledged Kong Yao's ability in the depths of his heart. To be able to maintain such a situation with such an inferior army, even Qiu Wei might not be able to do so if he was here. If it were him, he would have been defeated long ago. I originally thought that Jun Shang was captivated by this woman's beauty, but I didn't expect it to be Kong Yao. He was actually quite capable. However, looking at the 3 months of intense battles, they only suffered around 200,000 casualties. However, they lost close to 1 million night demons. Hu Zhongyuan's eyes were filled with confusion for a moment. What was the chance of victory in this battle? As soon as he thought of it, Hu Zhongyuan subconsciously blurted it out. Chai Zhou, what do you think are our chances of winning? Actually, in his heart, he didn't hope to win. He just wanted to force the night demon army back, and he would be satisfied. Chai Zhou was startled when he heard that. Hu Zhongyuan was the main general of the left wing, and if he said those words, it might shake the morale of the army. However, shortly after, he broke out into laughter, saying emotionally, 6 days later, we will go all out. Even if we die, we will drag a few night demons down with us. As long as Jun Shang can escape, our Gantian mountain will still be as stable as Mount Tai. When the few deputy generals heard that, their eyes didn't flicker at all, standing on the spot like javelins. Hu Zhongyuan was startled when he heard that. Then, he laughed out loud, that's right. This time, we will go all out and drag more night demons down. As long as Jun Shang is here, why do we need to worry? Chai Zhou, if I can make it back alive, I won't argue with your Chai clan about the Xuanqing bamboo arrow in the conference hall. When Chai Zhou heard that, he didn't show any gratitude. Instead, he scolded out, who wants you to give it to us? My Chai family will give up the Xuanqing bamboo arrow business. The Xuanqing bamboo arrow was the standard spiritual arrow of Gantian Mountain. However, Gantian Mountain was changing day by day, and the army didn't use it. Even among the commoners, it was sold really early. This was why the Chai family didn't care. Hu Zhongyuan laughed and didn't say a word. He still squinted as he looked at the black mist opposite him. He, Hu Zhongyuan, still had 6 to 7 days to live. At this moment, he suddenly had an urge to get drunk. Anyways, he was going to die, so it was okay to indulge once. To be able to follow Zhong's show to unify Donglin and experience so many exciting things. He had no regrets in this life. At most, 7 to 9 days. At this moment, in the clouds not far away from Seven Cloud Mountain, a green-robed Taoist said coldly. If Zhong Shou was here, he would be able to recognize this person. It was the Taoist who had clashed a few swords with him on Lianyun Island. When he said those words, apart from Wuji, there were 2 other Taoists around 30. They were all dressed in purple robes and gave off an extraordinary aura. Behind the 4 of them, there were 7 men who were also dressed in green robes and had long swords by their waists. Before this, I took the chance when the 2 armies were fighting to sneak in. Looking at the grain of the night demons, they could only last for 4 to 5 days. As for the Gantian Mountain Army, they can at most last for 6 days. After 6 days, they will be wiped out under Seven Cloud Mountain. However, along with the reinforcements that are rushing over, they might be able to last longer. Senior Master Minghui, speaking of which, doesn't this mean that Gantian Mountain has a high chance of winning? The one who replied was a middle-aged Taoist. At this moment, his eyes were filled with a weird expression. For Zhong Shou and the Gantian Mountain Army to be able to last until now already shocked him. When he heard the words of the green-robed Taoist, he found it even more unbelievable. He wasn't good at the art of war, but he knew that if the Gantian mountain ruler could defend until the night demons ran out of grain and had no more strength to fight, then they would most probably be able to win this battle. 3 months of fighting, one attacking and one defending. The night demons only lost 300,000 men. However, Zhong Shou has already lost 1,200,000 men. When Ming Hui said this, he laughed coldly. At this moment, Prince Jia Mingluo still has 1,600,000 men. It could be said that the disparity was so great that it made one's heart palpitate. The few people present all frowned and didn't say a word. As expected from a race that swept the cloud world and controlled hundreds of worlds during the ancient times, the combat strength of these night demons was indeed shocking. I think they have no chance at all. Ming Hui shook his head and came to a conclusion. A light flashed in his eyes, however, that Kong Yao is really surprising. I originally thought that the Monster King wouldn't be able to last for 10 days. However, in the blink of an eye, 3 months have passed. This woman's ability to lead troops is really rare in the world. The moment he said this, even Wu Ji was speechless. When Zhong Shou made Kong Yao the commander to lead the war matters of Gantian Mountain, everyone thought that the ruler was charmed by her beauty and did something stupid. Or maybe this woman was just a decoration, a chess piece that Zhong Shou was using to suppress the generals of Gantian Mountain. However, looking at it now, that person's ability to judge and use people made one exclaim in admiration once more. Although they were at a disadvantage in the consecutive battles against the night demons. However, everyone knew in their hearts that this was a clever housewife trying to cook a meal without rice. Although the situation was close to collapsing, it wasn't because of Kong Yao. Instead, it was because they had too few troops. Although they lost, it was still a glorious defeat. I didn't expect this woman to be so talented. She isn't a talent who personally came to the battlefield, but a person who is a general. In the past, her talent wasn't obvious, but now that she is leading such a huge army, it really makes one's eyes light up. Wu Ji sighed, following which he mocked coldly. I heard that the Taishang Emperor smashed 3 tables and smashed 4 teacups because of this. He also sent out decrees to scold the Kong family. Imperial teacher Zhong Xuan also went into seclusion because of this matter to calculate the fate of this Kong Yao. No matter how much he regrets, it is too late. Even if he can get her back, he won't be able to make her loyal. Ming Hui squinted. His eyes were also filled with mocking intent. That Zhong Shou's eyes are really sharp, it is really admirable. There is a reason why this kid was able to unify Donglin in a short few years. However, looking at the various methods he used, he might not be able to make Kong Yao convinced. After this battle, our Taoist sect might have a chance. If we can have this woman, once the spirit wave period arrives, our Taoist faction will have a much higher chance of winning. When Wu Ji heard this, he smiled and didn't reply. If there was a chance, naturally, he wouldn't let go of such a talent. Then, he heard another middle-aged man in a Taoist robe say coldly, I see that the victory and defeat of both sides are just a few lines away. If Dowling Vast Habitat goes all out to help, that Monster King might be able to win. The moment these words were said, the atmosphere instantly became tense. Wu Ji frowned. The person who spoke was one of the 3 sects of Huizhou, Luotian sect leader Long Shuang. He looked at the other person, sect leader Fian. Although he didn't reply, his expression was one of worry. Wu Ji knew what the 2 of them were unhappy about. After all, Huizhou was a place that had been passed down for 10,000 years. Unless they had no choice, they wouldn't be willing to give it up and rely on others. Before this, he didn't think that they had a chance of winning. However, at this moment, Zhong Shou was able to fight with the night demon to such an extent. The spiritual wave is imminent and the demon path is eyeing aggressively. Song Xingdao is also showing signs of rising up. With the strength of our Dowling Vast Habitat, we can't lose to such an unimportant place. Both sides will suffer heavy losses. The two of them had dark and cold faces and didn't say a word. Wuji said expressionlessly, "Moreover, all of your places are ready. After this battle, even if Jia Mingluo wins, he will suffer heavy losses and temporarily won't be able to go to Dongtu. Donglin Cloud Continent will be yours to take." The moment he said this, Fian Long Shuang and the others all looked over in shock. Even if Gantian Mountain lost, it wouldn't be so easy to fall. How would they allow their two sects to move in? Wuji silently looked at the 7 people behind him. As he knew that he couldn't easily take down Donglin, he needed to take the life of that monster king after Zhong Shou lost. He sighed in his heart. He didn't want to do that and felt that it wasn't appropriate. However, at this moment, this was the decree of the Dowling Palace head. Even he couldn't go against it. Chapter 664. Within the stone cave that could be considered spacious, 2 5-colored streaks of light were circling around and struggling. Their bodies twisted and turned like that of a giant python. However, no matter how they struggled, they were unable to break free from the restraints of Zhong Shou's hands. As time went on, they were slowly tamed and refined as they circled around his body. Then, he sucked them in from his palm and merged them into his chakra meridians. As usual, his skin cracked open and in a few minutes, it healed up. At this moment, there were a full 12 heaven meridians circulating in Zhong Shou's body. The tyrannical martial intent caused his true power to directly step over the threshold of the 9th level, entering the 9th level. This was the so-called spiritual grandmaster of the cloud world, the peak of the heaven realm that the outer region cultivators spoke of. He used his spiritual sense to sense heaven and earth. He could feel that his spiritual sense and the 4 parts of his spiritual sense were becoming clearer and clearer. A light flashed in Zhong Shou's eyes and then he took out an item. Instantly, a bright light shone all about, causing this dark stone cave to be as bright as day. This was the light-containing sand that he used the Book of Universe rubbing to exchange for from the Demon Path cultivator a few months ago. That day when he received this item, he didn't expect that he would be able to use it so early. The intense battle with Prince Jia Mingluo day and night was much stronger and more comprehensive than the best body training technique in the world. As a result, he was able to enter the 9th stage 2 years earlier than expected. A ball of crimson flame ignited with a whoosh sound and began to burn the object. After an entire hour, the sandstone that was only the size of a human finger was completely refined into a ball of crimson liquid. Zhong Shou took out several spiritual items and added in. Then, he condensed the liquid into the shape of a bead. Before this item cooled down, he used his spiritual sense to draw a spiritual formation within. A moment later, this pearl that had swelled to the size of a longan solidified. At this moment, it was shining with a 5-colored spiritual light. The pearl was jade-colored and gave off a 5-colored spiritual light. Then, Zhong Shou swallowed this 5-colored pearl into his stomach. It went all the way down to his chi-si. Then, an explosive sound rang out, shaking the entire area. His senses toward the stars in the sky instantly became clearer. The dozens of spirit veins that merged into Xiao Chen's body also seemed to have a core, gathering towards his dantian. Like dragons coiling around a pearl, they gathered in the sea of qi. Zhong Shou raised his eyebrows slightly, revealing a strange expression. Then, he began to calculate more carefully with his inner vision. In the end, the surprise in her starry eyes deepened. The true power in his body did not increase by much. However, the circulation of his inner breath was much smoother. With a core in his 9 chakra meridians, he was able to move his true power more freely. With the same level of cultivation, he could use more power. At this moment, the jade elixir was continuously gathering the spiritual energy of heaven and earth in his body and transforming it into internal breath. This was the power of the light-containing sand. The magnificent spirit jade marrow could strengthen a person's spiritual sense, and this light-containing sand could play the role of a martial artist's golden core. It was said that all martial cultivators, after reaching the immortal realm, would be able to condense a pill in their chi si. It was where energy gathered. When the pill turned 9, one would be able to step into the God realm. At this moment, within his dantian, the light-containing bead made from the light-containing sand could be called a fake pill. Although it was not as good as a true golden core, when a martial artist below the celestial realm got it, their combat strength would increase by 10 to 20%. Who knows if the Sky Demon Vast Habitat knew that he wouldn't let Wuxuan off easily, or if they really wanted to get close to him. With a laugh, Zhong Shou looked into his soul ocean. Apart from the original universe, yin, yang, lightning, thunder, wind, luck, stack, swallow, purify, illusion talismans, there were 12 spiritual restrictions. There were also life and death talismans. A total of 14 were hanging between the black and white Dharma. However, at this moment, outside of his soul ocean, there were many talisman patterns that were forming. In a few more months, a brand new true spiritual talisman would be formed. They were spit and spirit, 2 types of laws. Spit and swallow corresponded to one another. During these days, Zhong Shou comprehended day and night and felt more and more. Only by merging the seemingly useless laws of heaven and earth into his Tao foundations could the black and white whole Dharma be truly perfected. As for spirit, everything had a spirit and it represented the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. All those who focused on cultivating the soul to seek the grand Tao of the universe called themselves spirit cultivators. To spirit cultivators, these laws that were ever-changing and hard to grasp weren't something they couldn't lack. However, if he could form it, it would be of great help. At this moment, Zhong Shou was completing the 18 talismans. With Long Ying as his master and also Tsang Xingdao's many book, Zhong Shou could take less detours than normal spirit masters. Before a cultivator reached the celestial realm, the more talismans they could form, the better. The more talismans they had, the more stable their Tao foundations would be. However, the path after the celestial realm had to be filled with ideas. Merging these talismans together, those that weren't useful needed to be expelled. At this time, due to the Tao foundations being stable, be it choosing to give up or merging in new laws, it would use up large amounts of time. This was why before the spirit realm, one had to be really careful and make preparations for what would happen thousands of years later. For example, Long Ying admitted that because he took a wrong step, he was stuck at the peak of the Saint Realm for close to 6,000 years. Luckily, the merge in one laws could be easily changed, and it didn't take up much time. This also allowed Long Ying to keep a chance to step into the end realm. Zhong Shou also didn't know what kind of path he would walk in the future. Would the black and white whole Dharma be able to walk to the end? However, it wouldn't be wrong to merge in more laws. At that time, it would be easier to give up than to come in. Since he was so talented to be able to form 18 talismans, then he should make good use of it. A moment later, his homework for the day was completed. Observing his body, be it internal energy or soul power, they were all at their peak. Even if he had to fight Prince Jia Mingluo for 10 days and 10 nights, he wouldn't be afraid. Zhong Shoxin was really eager to try. A thread of spiritual sense started to reach into the heaven gate above his head. He could feel that the barrier was loosening. Perhaps he could forcefully break through the barrier of the heavens first? He increased his strength once more, but then he felt that the blocking power became firm once more. Zhong Shou's brow rose up and he knew that he was still lacking a little. Moreover, this time wasn't the right time. The battle was imminent and it wasn't wise to take the risk now. To break through this barrier, he had to wait until his spiritual cultivation reached the peak of grade 9. After ending his cultivation, Zhong Shou got up and left the cave. Walking along the passageway, they arrived at a barren cliff. He saw that the sky was already dark and silent, the sunset glow was slowly dissipating. Looking down, he saw groups of heavily armored night demons walking out of the thick black mist and forming up 20 miles below the mountain. Their eyes were red and their fighting spirit was blazing. Looking at the foot of the mountain, out of the hundreds of stone castles a few days ago, only 90 were left. Even after a day of repairs, they were still really broken. Zhong Shou's expression turned serious, and then he relaxed. It was already the 6th night since that day. They said that it was 7 days, but tonight was the day of the final battle. His body flashed, and he flew 10,000 feet up to the peak of the mountain, only to see that everything here was already prepared. 100 Grade 9 energy-destroying crossbows were transported over from Donglin, and they were spread out on the surrounding few mountains. The commander tent was nowhere to be seen, only a high platform was left. There was a golden throne above, similar to the words of the Avicii throne. Kong Yao was also dressed in golden heavy armor, a sword by her waist. She stood beside the throne, looking valiant and heroic. That armor seemed to be made of gold, shining with a golden light. One could see it from far away. Behind the golden chair was a 300-foot-tall Gantian king flag. Beside it was also a flag. On the flag that was flying in the wind, there was a Kong word embroidered on it. Zhong Shou didn't show any courtesy, sitting down on the throne. Then, he was speechless. Is there a need to be so exaggerated? Even the high platform under him was also golden. Naturally, it wasn't as extravagant as the Xiang King, but it was still 100 feet tall. However, with that, it was really eye-catching. Even at night, under the light of those illuminating crystals, it shone with a golden light, eye-piercing and visible for tens of miles. One must know that recently when he was in Donglin, he had been promoting frugality. I don't dare to misuse military resources, it is just a layer of gold. Kong Yao glanced at Zhong Shou. She remembered that when they first met, she felt that this monster king was really extravagant. However, recently, for some reason, he suddenly became poor. Since it is the final battle, how can I not have the intent to fight to the death? Since I personally destroyed the retreat path of the million-strong army, naturally, I have to have the heart to die with the enemy. If not, how can I convince them? Setting up this golden platform and wearing this golden armor is to tell the army that you and I are here. Kong Yao is here. Even if I die, I won't take a step back. The sword stabbed into the ground, giving off a solemn aura. Zhong Shou didn't pay attention, stepping on it. As expected, it was made of rough iron and wasn't worth much. Looking at Kong Yao, that layer of heavy armor only looked good. He instantly laughed. Then, he frowned as he looked into the sky. The stars appeared, there were no clouds for 10,000 miles. Who knows what the situation would be like tomorrow? I have calculated, within 10 days. This place will be under the blazing sun. Dozens of days ago, I asked my father and he said the same thing. My father has been in charge of the imperial astronomer for many years and rarely predicted wrong things. With just one look, she saw through Zhong Shou's intentions. Kong Yao explained expressionlessly, just in case, I asked Mingdo and Lieha to take out 3,000 grade 8 mind stones from the treasury to set up a formation. Be it the night demon race trying to summon the clouds and rain, or the sudden change in weather, we can deal with it. Zhong Shou's lips twitched. 3,000 grade 8 mind stones? That was 300 grade 9, half of Gantian Mountain's tax revenue this year. Kong Yao smiled, her eyes filled with the joy of revenge. When I use troops, I only want to be perfect. I don't think ruler will object? Zhong Shou was startled and speechless. He thought back to Prince Jiamingluo's waist. After all, he was one of the 8 princes of the night demon race, so his wealth shouldn't be small, right? Faintly, he was looking forward to it. Chapter 665. when the desolate sound of the bugle horn resounded through the sky. Hu Zhongyuan instinctively woke up from his deep sleep. He shook his head and strode onto the city wall of the stone castle. After a few months, it had already formed into instinct. During the day, even if there were drums by his ears, he would still be able to sleep. However, when the sun set, he would wake up. Along the way, he saw numerous soldiers lined up under the command of their colonels and colonels, walking up the city walls in an orderly manner. Many of them were new soldiers who had just rushed over in the past 2 days. However, after the battle last night, their eyes weren't as lost as when they first arrived. However, his eyes were still filled with fear and trepidation. Hu Zhongyuan shook his head slightly, then stood on top of the city gate tower in an imposing manner. Observing the battlefield from here, one could see that the remaining 90 stone castles were all waiting solemnly. At this moment, it should be the strongest he had in these 3 months. Zhonggang and Rentianxing had sent their elite troops west of Huizhou to assist. They rode on beasts and rushed day and night, finally rushing over. Within 6 days, they brought 1,000,000 troops to the foot of Seven Cloud Mountain. It caused the number of troops gathered here to reach 4 million. Just his left wing alone commanded a total of 50 military towns. Even if they were all surrendered troops, some of them had other intentions and some of them hated Gantian Mountain. However, Hu Zhongyuan was confident that he could unify their strength. With the veterans from before as the backbone, it was enough for these people to maintain sufficient combat strength. 3 months of intense battles, not only did his martial path improve, he was also slowly getting used to commanding the army. He looked opposite at the night demon army formation that was getting close. Hu Zhongyuan suddenly heard a loud rumble, and after a short moment, the mountain beneath his feet began to shake, causing him to be unable to walk steadily. That sound caused one's eardrums to hurt as it spread out for hundreds of miles. At this moment, not only did the soldiers under him look towards the source of the sound in shock. Even the night demon on the other side was startled. Hu Zhongyuan narrowed his eyes and looked back. Without needing to guess, he knew that it was Kong Yao who had blown up the only path to Huizhou dozens of miles away. Henceforth, the area below the Seven Cloud Mountain was a land of death. The 2 million people here had no way out, no way to escape. In his heart, he didn't care at all. He was already determined to die, so he naturally didn't care if there was a way out. What he needed to worry about was his subordinate. However, when he looked around, he made up his mind. Naturally, he didn't need to worry about the elites from Gantian Mountain. The rest of the surrendered troops were also in better condition than he had expected. Speaking of which, that woman had already informed the entire army about this matter a day ago. At that time, although dissatisfaction and grumbling were everywhere, they were already mentally prepared. Now that the matter had come to a head, he no longer panicked when he first heard that there was no way out. Many of the soldiers' faces were stiff and cold, filled with deathly stillness and despair, numbly gripping the weapons in their hands. Even though he knew that he was going to die, he still made up his mind. Many people even subconsciously took a glance at the summit of the Seven Cloud Mountain. In that direction, a shining golden light entered their eyes. Only then did some life appear in their eyes. Although the left army inspector had cut off all their paths of retreat, she didn't hesitate. She also said that even if she died here today, she wouldn't take a single step back. Hu Zhongyuan laughed. In his heart, he was filled with respect. This woman's grasp of the hearts of people was pretty much at the peak. At this moment, although most of his troops had lost all hope, at the same time, they were determined to die. Even the newly surrendered troops weren't worried that they wouldn't fight. In the end, Huizhou was where these people were born and raised. On the contrary, it had nothing to do with Gantian Mountain. Squinting, Hu Zhongyuan waited calmly until Chai Zhou stood by his side. The situation today isn't right, that side seems to be going all out. As far as the eye could see, There were more than 100 square formations of night demons, each consisting of about 10,000 people, lined up neatly 20 miles ahead. The aura today was indeed a little different. His eyes were already filled with red intent. The formation was really strict, but their fighting spirit was also exploding out. What was most surprising was that the hundreds of thousands of Grade 4 elites that Jia Mingluo treasured were all placed on the front lines. Hu Zhongyuan smiled, not caring at all. So what if it is different? 3 months ago, the 2 million night demon troops weren't able to crush us. So what if we go all out now? However, he looked to the right with a hint of worry in his eyes. The only thing he wasn't at ease about was the middle army that bore the most pressure in this battle. Kong Yao unexpectedly gave the main general position that Zhong Yuan was in charge of to Ren Tianxing. Not only did it free up the Blood Cloud cavalry, it also allowed Zhong Yuan to focus on commanding those 300,000 elite cavalry. However, could that kid really do it? He felt a little jealous. He, Hu Zhongyuan, had been through many years to have such a position in the army. However, in just a short year, Ren Tianxing had become a top general in this area and was heavily valued by Zhong Shouxin. Ren Tianxing's ability to use troops is something that even the right inspector admires. He definitely has his reasons for saying that you are weaker than him. Why do you need to worry about that person? You just need to care about yourself. Chai Zhou burst out laughing, his tone filled with a mocking tone. Following which, his voice became slightly more serious. It has begun. Hu Zhongyuan scoffed coldly in dissatisfaction, following which his brow furrowed. What he saw were hundreds and thousands of large-sized crossbow carriages being pushed out from the night demon army. In the blink of an eye, thousands of crossbow bolts flew into the sky. There were also nearly 300 huge artillery carts that were covered in runes behind them, shooting hundreds of black balls at them. Each time they landed, a vast purple-black lightning would explode out and cover 1,000 feet of land. Within this range, anyone who was Grade 4 and below would be ripped to shreds. The spiritual formation within the stone castle was shaking like it couldn't take the burden. Hu Zhongyuan didn't care at all, standing still. As expected, in just a moment, the giant crossbows on the mountain peak started to counterattack. Many of the 9-armed spiritual crossbows that he snatched from Weihai were destroyed, but there were still 70 of them. Along with the Grade 9 energy-destroying crossbows from Gantian Mountain, there were around 200 of them. Although the number was slightly lesser, as they were on the mountain peak, the range was further. In just a moment, the flames of the crossbow carriages were suppressed. However, in this way, these 9th-order killing weapons were all restrained. There was no hope for the following battle. Hu Zhongyuan's expression was stupefied. Who knew how many times this had happened in the past 3 months? The Night Demon main general seemed to know that he couldn't just use the strength of these weapons to crush the enemy's defensive line. Roughly a quarter of an hour later, the square formations had already started to move forward. Hu Zhongyuan scoffed coldly, holding the Tiger Overlord knife in his hand. Right away, he knew that the other areas were all feints to spread out his troop. The true breakthrough point was still the stone castle that he was standing on. This was the weakest and most broken out of the 20 stone castles on the left wing. It was because he knew that this castle was the most dangerous, which was why he stood here to command the battle. Today, he wanted to see whether or not these night demons had enough ability to step over his corpse. At this moment, the spirit masters hiding deep within the stone castle were relying on the spell altars to cast spells, only to see numerous light dots fall down from the sky. They were many millstone-sized meteors that covered the night demon formation in front. However, within the square formation, close to 40 Grade 7 experts flew up and slashed these meteors one by one. Only at the very end, a portion of them escaped, causing some chaos and casualties within the formation. The enemy's counterattack also followed closely behind. Hundreds and thousands of red fireballs surged over. They exploded beneath the city walls, causing the city walls to shake. Hu Zhongyuan's lips curled up as he flew up 1,000 feet into the air. With a knife slashing down, he seemed to have transformed into a fierce tiger. The body of the saber and the arm faintly showed the shape of a white tiger. This knife was the tiger overlord Qianqiu. The Iron Tiger race was one of the inheritances of the White Tiger bloodline. Where the knife intent reached was extreme sharpness. It wasn't Hu Qianqiu's legacy, but something he created from studying the platinum dragon sword that Zhong Shou left in the book hiding pavilion. Till date there were only 3 strokes, but there was nothing it couldn't slice and break. Wherever the knife light passed, there would be a sharp whistle. 2 grade 7 night demons fell from the sky, fresh blood splattering all about. There were no signs of life from them. However, there were even more counterattacks that charged towards him. Hu Zhongyuan didn't care, dodging while retreating swiftly. Only when he couldn't dodge would he wave the Tiger Overlord knife in his hand to destroy those knife lights and sword images. As expected, just as he was about to use up all his strength, a giant axe and several energy glows slashed through the air. It guided him safely back to the stone castle's spirit array. "You dog, even if you want to die, don't choose such a time." Chai Zhou scolded right away. He was afraid. If a grade 9 night demon attacked him just now, this fellow might not have been able to return. Hu Zhongyuan laughed as he looked at the knife in his hand. The battlefield was the best place to train a person. A few years ago, he was addicted to wine and women, indulging in the glory of Gantian Mountain. At that time, his ambitions slowly disappeared and he didn't think that there would be a day when he would step into grade 7. Just the elites of Gantian Mountain. During these days, there were numerous people who broke through to their original realms. Speaking of which, that person should have stepped into the peak of grade 8. What are you afraid of? There is the Blood Cloud Cavalry and Zhong Yuan's Iron Cavalry. I don't believe that Jiawat Luo would dare to leave the true experts with me. When Chai Zhou heard that, he looked to the side. Only to see that tens of miles away, there was a huge cavalry army standing quietly on a flat piece of land. There was no stone castle covering them, no spiritual formation protecting them. However, it caused the dozens of night demon army formations to be wary and ready for battle. Chapter 666. Sitting on the golden throne, Zhong Shou was looking carefully at the battle situation below. For a full 4 hours, he didn't shift his gaze away. He could feel the strength of the night demon race's attack. Compared to before, it had increased by several times. Some areas that suffered heavy casualties didn't avoid anymore. Instead, they used life after life to forcefully push their way over. Some stone castles and stone walls that could last for at least a night had no choice but to give up in just a few minutes. The entire formation seemed to be smashed by an iron hammer, forced to retreat to the foot of the mountain until there was nowhere to escape. The only place that was still calm was the plains on the left. The 300,000 Iron Cavalry led by the Blood Cloud Cavalry didn't enter the battle. However, they restricted the 600,000 troops under Jia Mingluo, amongst which there were 2 towns of grade 5 elites. Grade 4 troops had 14 towns spread out on the left and right, locking down the direction that Zhong Yuan's Iron Cavalry could attack from. There were also Jia Mingluo's close guards, a full 2,000 grade 6 night demon warriors hidden within. This was the only elite force that could go up against the Blood Cloud Cavalry. However, their numbers were slightly weaker and they couldn't go up against the Blood Cloud Cavalry alone. After several clashes, they had suffered many losses. Naturally, the Blood Cavalry under him also suffered some losses. In just a few months, there were 400 grade 5 and grade 6 experts who joined in. Some came from Donglin, while some came from Huizhou. After 3 months of fighting, this Blood Cloud Cavalry still maintained the number of 5,000 and they were all elite and strong. The training on the battlefield and the dragon stallion blood essence pills that Xianyuan Iran refined helped their cultivations soar. Close to half of the 4,000 blood cavalry at the beginning had advanced. For the first time, the number of 6th-grade knights in the blood cavalry had reached 1,000. This was without a doubt the strongest fighting force he had at his disposal. It was also one of the pillars that allowed them to remain undefeated despite the dangerous situation. At this moment, the 60 knight demon towns didn't move at all and continued to attack. It wasn't because they were careful, but because Zhong Yuan brought this iron cavalry, one knife and one spear to kill their way out, such that the knight demon generals had to be wary and be on guard. However, when he looked at the battle situation, Zhong Shou's brows furrowed slightly. Other than the cavalry under the command of Zhong Yuan, the situation was tense everywhere. The Huizhou native troops that Zhong Gang brought back were all elite troops and none of them were below grade 2. Their path of retreat was cut off, and it was a battle to defend their territory, so their morale was pretty good. However, his combat strength was still weaker than the Night Demon. Relying on the stone walls of the stone castle, they could still fight. However, once the spirit formation was destroyed, those fortifications would also be destroyed, and they would no longer be able to hold on. They would need even more military power to intercept them. As far as the eye could see, there were hundreds and thousands of people dying under the blades of the Night Demon at every moment. Shaking his head slightly, Zhong Shou looked at the sky. The bright moon hung high in the sky, and the moonlight shone down like water. At this moment, he didn't have the heart to appreciate the beautiful scenery. It was also the first time he felt that the night was so long. He really wanted this bright starry sky to instantly disappear. "Ruler, are you regretting?" Kong Yao looked at Zhong Shou with a weird expression. She could sense that this fellow's eyes were filled with sadness for the first time. She didn't understand and shook her head slightly. To Donglin, they had to fight this battle. At this moment, the Gantian army had already shown their strength to the enemy. The Night Demon race had suffered heavy losses. Even if they were worried about the strength of the Gantian army and didn't dare to offend them. However, once the Night Demon race had foundations in the Cloud World, they would have endless reinforcements. Sooner or later, they would have to target Donglin and a battle would be unavoidable. The claws that the Night Demon race stretched out needed to be smacked back right away. Zhong Shou couldn't help but laugh. Just now, he only felt that this was a little different from what he experienced in the virtual environment of the future as Tanxio. At the foot of the mountain, what was disappearing one after another were real lives. In the God Emperor game, one could revive after dying, and one's character could be refreshed. In the past, when he led troops to battle, the casualties were at most a few thousand, so he didn't feel so deeply about it. However, at this moment millions of people were fighting to the death, causing his heart realm to waver. If he didn't feel sad, then he would have lost his humanity. However, if he cared too much, Zhong Shou wasn't fit to be the Gantian Mountain King and wasn't fit to chase the peak of the martial path. However, war was a huge matter for a country. It was a place of life and death, a path to survival. He had to pay attention to it and be careful. Such a sentence flashed across his heart. Zhong Shou's emotions were unprecedentedly deep. To him, the dangers of war were nothing more than a few simple numbers. How much money would he lose? However, in Donglin, there were millions of soldiers whose lives were tied up here. In the future, when he ruled the country and used troops, he had to be really careful. I see that the generals are risking their lives. General Ren is saving his strength and definitely has a plan. The situation today seems dangerous, but it is actually safe. On the contrary, it seems like the night demons are really out of grain, Kong Yao said expressionlessly. She knew that Zhong Shou himself was an unparalleled general talent. In a situation like this, his ability to use troops was even above hers. It wasn't like she couldn't see the situation of the battle, which was why she didn't understand. However, her heart suddenly moved as she looked towards Zhong Shou's chest. Beneath it there was a ball of red light shining. Was it the necklace that she gave to Zhong Shou? Kong Yao's eyes flashed slightly, following which her lips curled up. Her heart suddenly relaxed a little. This was the king energy burning intensely. Even this treasure needed to go all out to be able to suppress it. Although she couldn't look at the energy, she knew that Zhong Shou's fate and destiny was definitely changing intensely. If it weakened, then this treasure wouldn't have any movement at all. Such a situation was a sign that the king energy was gathering and rising up. However, why was the reaction so strong to such an extent? Following this, she didn't bother about it. Kong Yao continued to hold on to her sword and look below. If they thought that they would definitely win this battle, then they would be wrong. At such a stage, they still couldn't be careless. This battle would be the one where her name would spread across the cloud world, Kong Yao. They could only win, they couldn't lose. Only to hear a loud explosion dozens of miles away. It was a stone castle that was collapsing. Coincidentally, it was the stone castle at the front of the main army. Luckily, a moment ago, the defending troops within had all retreated. Although the castle collapsed, there weren't many casualties. The moment this castle broke, a 10,000-foot gap appeared in the entire defensive line. Kong Yao looked on coldly and didn't say a word. She also didn't seem like she was going to give orders. In the next moment, more than 40 square formations of 10,000 men walked out from the stone castle. They didn't rely on the defenses and didn't use the power of the spiritual formation, directly standing in front of the night demon army. What was more unexpected was that they weren't waiting there solemnly. Instead, they spread out this steel wall-like formation and pressed down without any hesitation. The enemy was strong and they were weak, but when the red and black torrents clashed together, the dozens of square formations of the night demon army were forced to retreat in an instant. Kong Yao smiled when she saw this. General Ren really knows how to grasp the chance. Zhong Shou nodded slightly. 4 hours of intense battle, relying on the stone castle, they used up the strength of the night demon army. Hundreds of thousands of people were resting up at the back. At this moment, although the stone castle was broken, it was also when the night demon army was at their weakest. This was why the moment the battle started, the red armor warriors had the advantage. Zhong Shoxin didn't have high hopes. As expected, after the initial difficulty, the night demon army started to retreat. Along with the few night demon army square formations at the back, they replaced the troops at the front. The battle entered a stalemate once more. The aura of the hundreds of thousands of red armor warriors started to weaken. However, just at this moment, 2 10,000-man formations with armor and weapons that were different from the surrounding red armor warriors suddenly jumped out. They broke into the night demon formation. At the start, the night demon army didn't care. However, when these 20,000 Big Dipper sword soldiers charged in like blades cutting through bamboo, pretty much everyone's eyes focused over. Red giant swords rose up in an orderly manner and slashed down in an orderly manner. Even if one was extremely powerful and could block 1 or 2 swords, they would not be able to block 3 or 4 swords. Break through. Kill. Break through. Kill once more. They broke through several formations and pretty much pierced through the enemy formation. Just as the night demon army started to panic, the other areas also attacked at the same time. Hundreds of thousands of red armor warriors once again forced the enemy to retreat step by step. Although they were spread out on hundreds of thousands of feet wide formations, they were really well coordinated. Their advance and retreat were perfect. It also kept the pressure that the Big Dipper sword soldiers faced at the lowest level. Wherever the 20,000 large scarlet swords went, many night demons were incomparably alarmed. They flew up from the ground to avoid the swords. Some people even tried to throw down spears to block the footsteps of the 20,000 Big Dipper sword soldiers. However, in the next moment, tens of thousands of red arrows suddenly covered the sky. They were the Big Dipper crossbow soldiers. In an instant, the night demons in the sky were pretty much empty. Close to 10,000 night demons fell from the sky. The hundreds of thousands of red armor warriors were the weaker side. They went from defending to attacking, suppressing the enemy such that they were forced to retreat. They were actually on the verge of defeat. Maybe they felt that they couldn't hold on anymore. Right opposite Zhong Yuan's iron cavalry, a full 6 grade 4 formations were pulled back and rushed over to where the close to 1,000,000 infantry troops were fighting. In that instance, Zhong Yuan's cavalry finally moved. Hundreds of thousands of cavalry galloped swiftly, 1.2 million horse hooves trampling. They surged like a wave, coincidentally revealing a weakness after the grade 4 elite troops retreated. They also charged in like a hot knife through butter. Blood clouds surged everywhere the 300,000 cavalry passed. It was a patch of white bones. In just a moment, numerous night demon army formations collapsed one after another. Their casualties reached 30,000. Samuraim's eyes flashed. At this moment, even he couldn't help but praise in his heart. Although Ren Tianxing and Zhong Yuan didn't interact with one another, their coordination was amazing. Chapter 667. General Zhong and General Ren are both unparalleled famous generals. Even in Taishang they could be generals and marquises. For them to be willing to serve Gantian, it is ruler's blessing. Kong Yao's eyes flashed, filled with emotions. She didn't expect that Ren Tianxing would fight this battle to such an extent. She also didn't understand why a general talent like Ren Tianxing would be willing to stay in Donglin Cloud Continent, such a secluded place. No matter where he was, this kind of ability to command troops would be used in an important position. Did this Zhong Shou have some special charm? To make all these talents listen to his orders? A moment later, the battle situation below changed. In the center, the night demon army stopped blocking the hundreds of thousands of red armor warriors. Many of the night demon warriors even retreated from the front and formed up in a formation thousands of feet behind. Not long after, a strict and wide array was set up. The two wings stretched out, forming a concave shape. They looked like they were going to pincer Ren Tianxing's hundreds of thousands of troops from both sides. The 500,000 night demons who were facing off against Zhong Yuan were the same. They weren't in a rush to save their own race. Instead, their formation became more orderly as they slowly pressed over. There was another force of roughly 100,000 who carefully surrounded the back path of the red armor cavalry. Kong Yao frowned and then said unwillingly, "The generals of the night demon army aren't useless." She decisively cut her own flesh to prevent the battle situation from becoming worse. Such decisiveness wasn't something that couldn't be done after being on the battlefield for a long time. Actually, during these 3 months, she had a clear understanding of the night demon general's ability to use troop. During these few days, they were schemed against by her and lost a lot. However, her side also suffered a lot. This was why from the start, Kong Yao didn't expect to be able to totally crush the enemy this time. If it was so easy, she wouldn't have to use such methods to force Prince Jia Mingluo to fight to the death with her here. As expected, moments later, after Ren Tianxing crushed the enemy in front of him, he stopped chasing. Instead, they reorganized their formation and retreated step by step while vigilantly guarding against the enemy. They retreated all the way to the destroyed stone castle before stopping. Zhong Shou's side did the same. His cavalry trampled, reaping the lives of tens of thousands of night demons. He also knew when to stop, decisively turning around. The hundreds of thousands of cavalrymen safely returned to their original positions. At this moment, although the night demons had suffered 130,000 casualties, they still had a firm grasp of the situation. However, Ren Tianxing and Zhong Yuan's attack this time was not without results. Although they did not succeed in defeating the enemy, The morale of the Central Army and the left and right wings skyrocketed. Since the sky turned dark, they could only passively deal with the attacks of the Night Demon Army. He had long since become numb to it, begging for death in despair. However, this small victory seemed to have allowed all the soldiers at the foot of the mountain to see some hope. It turned out that the Night Demon Army was not invincible or undefeatable. It turned out that they were not completely powerless to fight back. Within the Gantian Mountain Army, there were generals like Ren Tianxing and Zhong Yuan who could turn the tides. If they persisted, who knows, they might be able to win and live. At this moment, the enemy was obviously more careful in using troops. Looking out from the mountain peak, one could see that there were more troops moving over from the left and right. A full 60,000-man square formations were placed in the center. It caused the pressure on the two wings to be greatly relaxed. Ren Tianxing didn't fear at all. The 500,000 red armor soldiers were still in formation behind the ruins, their aura like that of a mountain, standing tall and firm. Zhong Shou heaved a sigh of relief when he saw this. With Ren Tianxing's ability, he should be able to defend until dawn. At that time, they would be in an undefeatable position. Would they win more or win less, however, following this would be a war of attrition, which was the cruelest. The Night Demon main general had suffered a loss in the hands of Ren Tianxing and wouldn't underestimate him anymore. The foot of Gantian Mountain would definitely turn into a meat grinder. Just as he frowned, there was a ripple in the night sky. A talisman suddenly sped through the air and arrived. It caused the nearby guards to turn their heads nervously and look over. Zhong Shou's brow rose up as he looked over. When the talisman entered his eyes, he wasn't surprised but was slightly startled. He waved his hand to tell the people around not to be wary. Then, he reached out and grabbed it. With a thought, he knew that this was what common people Palace head Fangwen passed down. There was no other meaning in the talisman, just that he was worried about his safety and was a little worried about this battle. The 7,000 common people mysterious dragon warriors had rushed to Huizhou 3 days ago to hide and could rush over at any moment to help him. However, at this moment there was an accident. Behind Seven Cloud Mountain, there was another elite force hiding. He didn't know where they came from, but their scale was huge. However, they weren't weaker than Song Xingdao's 7,000 Dao soldiers and were even stronger. At this moment, they were restricting one another and couldn't help him much. At the end of the talisman were 20 words: "You are in a killing situation, be careful, be really careful. If things are urgent, you have to live first." Zhong Shou's brow rose up and he felt a little warm. Although they were unable to help, the concern of the common people Palace head could be seen in the words. Kong Yao, who was beside him, felt that something was wrong and asked with a frown, "Did something happen?" "Don't worry, it is just a small matter." Zhong Shou scoffed coldly when he heard that. He clenched his hand and the talisman was smashed into pieces. In this world, there were only 3 to 5 sects that could easily take out Dao soldiers of the same scale as Zhongxing Dao. Apart from Tailing Yuanshi, there were only the 5 vast habitats and the Taishang that occupied dozens of states in the central continent. As for where this elite cavalry came from, Zhong Shou was too lazy to bother. In this battle, he stood with his back to the mountain, in a towering place. Everything within 3,000 miles was as clear as a piece of paper. With the illusionary heart mirror in hand, he didn't need to worry about illusions. No matter what these grade 6 Dao soldiers were planning, it didn't matter. However, he felt a chill in his heart. They didn't inform him beforehand and also didn't have any intentions to fight the night demons. As for why these people came, he didn't need to ask to know. They really didn't want to give up on killing him, they were so eager. Speaking of which, junior nephew Fang Wei didn't care that Song Xingdao was in a tight spot, sending 7,000 common people mysterious dragon warriors over at once. He probably also thought that Zhong Shou would definitely lose. How generous! Just at this moment, a laugh spread out in his ear. It is indeed a small matter to the ruler. As long as we drag this battle to noon and we win, all the small schemes will be like snow in the middle of summer, unable to do anything. As he said that, that person sighed. Everyone thinks that the Gantian army will definitely lose this time. However, I know that the ruler is in an undefeatable position. 10 days ago, my sect palace head was nearly persuaded to join hands with that person to take a slice of the pie in Donglin Cloud Continent. Luckily, this time the palace head wasn't as rash as last time and came to a conclusion. He sent me over to personally take a look. This voice was really suddenly ringing out in Zhong Shou's ear. What was weird was that apart from Kong Yao, the people around didn't notice anything. Zhong Shouxin's heart tightened as he turned his head and looked out, only to see that the person behind him was familiar. He remembered that a few years ago when he rushed back to Gantian Mountain from the east of Donglin, they had met once. Those words made one's heart jump. Zhong Shouxin's expression sunk slightly, his face putting on a fake smile. So it is Villa Head Yen. The person in front of him was Yen Fan. Who knows when he had appeared behind Zhong Shou? At this moment, he acted like he didn't hear anything, looking at Kong Yao at the side. The ruler has good eyes, Yen Fan admires you. People only thought that General Kong was a defensive general talent and wasn't of much use. Who knew that once he commanded 10,000 troops, he would be able to do it so easily. Using mirage light to break the enemy, what a brilliant idea. However, yesterday I didn't think that the ruler would be able to last till noon. A weird glow flashed in his eyes as he looked towards the foot of the mountain. Zhong Yuan's name, his unbelievable battle records were known by everyone. He had known about his general talents many years ago. Who knew that under Zhong Shou there would be a Ren Tianxing? Looking at how he used troops, he was most probably an unparalleled general seed. After saying so much, Zhong Shouxin calmed down a little. At least this person didn't seem to have any bad intentions. As expected, he heard Yen Fan's tone change. Congratulations, ruler. After this battle, Gantian Mountain will have at least 2 million elite troops. Conquering other worlds might be possible. They could indeed be considered elite troops. After going through such a Shura battlefield, being forced by the night demon race to be able to survive for a day and night and not die, they wouldn't be any weaker than the soldiers he left in Gantian Mountain who had been through hundreds of battles. Even in the entire cloud world, they would be a top army, able to break sharp edges, able to be as firm as a rock. Most of the people gathered here were people under the age of 30. During this time of the spiritual wave, who knows how many people would grow up from these soldiers in the future? Grade 6 Xuanwu ancestors, even grade 7 ascended ancestors were possible. If he could make them work wholeheartedly, they would be the pillars of Gantian Mountain, the backbone. Kong Yao listened quietly at the side. At this moment when she heard that, her eyes opened in rage as she stared coldly at Yen Fan. Such elite troops were not bad. However, one needed to go through cruel battles to be able to train them up. There were 2 million people here, and after today, it would be good if one of them could survive. If it was possible, she would rather not. As a commander, if she cared about such things and didn't love the lives of her soldiers, then she wouldn't be far from death. Everything that happened today was because she had no choice. Yen Fan was startled, following which he gave out an awkward smile. I misspoke. I don't have any other intentions, I just have high hopes for ruler to expand into the outer regions. His expression turned solemn. The Taoist faction withdraws. My Kenzo sect wants 25% of all profits. He felt a sense of urgency in his chest. If he gave up on this chance, the Kenzo sect would definitely regret it. Chapter 668. Taoist sect withdraws. My Kenzo sect wants 25% of the profits. Looking at Zhong Shou, Yen Fan felt a sense of urgency. If they gave up on this chance, The Kenzo sect would definitely regret it. Since the Taoist sect didn't want it, then the Kenzo sect would take it. He really didn't know what the heavens were thinking. Why would such a good ruler appear in such a chaotic world when the spiritual wave was about to rise? Samuraim's eyes squinted. The Taoist sect withdraws? Speaking of which, the person who plotted in the dark and wanted to push him into a corner was Dowling Vast Habitat? Although Yen Fan didn't say it directly, his words hinted at it. Even if it wasn't, it had deep connections. There was no chance of reconciliation with him. There was also the fact that he had asked for 25% of the profits on the spot. He really didn't understand why the Taoist sect changed their attitude at this moment when they were trying to get close to him. They actually targeted Donglin. He really didn't know whether to laugh or to hate them. Did they really think that he would definitely lose this battle? That he wouldn't be able to return to Gantian alive? Suddenly, his heart moved. Zhong Shou's eyes were filled with understanding. He was deep in thought as he looked towards the sky covered in darkness. A cold disdain appeared at the corner of his lips. That was the only possibility. Only if Zhong Shou couldn't return to Donglin could he cause Gantian Mountain to totally collapse and have a chance of splitting up Donglin. It seemed like apart from Jia Mingluo, there were other enemies tonight as expected. It was a killing calamity. He heaved a sigh of relief. Suddenly, he felt grateful towards that person from Sky Demon Vast Habitat. If it wasn't for his cultivation breaking through and forming that light-containing pill, it would have been hard to predict his life and death in this battle. However, speaking of which, the light-containing sand to craft a fake pill shouldn't have appeared in this era. What people knew was that this item was precious and could help one break through some spirit realm barriers. The first person to use the light-containing pill was 1,700 years later. He broke out into a laugh, his fingernails digging deep into his flesh. Between his tightly clenched palms, 2 black and white dots faintly appeared. He had long wanted to use this trump card in front of Jia Mingluo. He had long wanted to see if this immeasurable light could harm the Night Devil royal family. Before he was reminded by Kong Yao, this was his last chance to turn defeat into victory. If he couldn't win on the battlefield, then he would kill this Night Devil leader first. However, he didn't have enough confidence to kill Jia Mingluo in one strike, which was why he had been waiting patiently. Who would have thought that in the end, he would be looked down upon by others? Zhong Shouxin had a clear understanding of the situation. A trace of viciousness surged within him. Then, he forcefully suppressed it and treated it calmly. Similarly, he didn't intend to easily agree to Yen Fan's request. He only shook his head slightly and said, "The matter of conquering the outer regions can be discussed in the future. Raise the price as high as the sky and pay as low as the ground." At this moment it was indeed not the time to bargain with the Sword Sect. If they really wanted to talk, then they would have to wait until he won. He raised his eyes again and looked at the other side. Zhong Shou's eyes were filled with surprise. Prince Jia Mingluo could actually bear with it at such a time and didn't challenge him to a battle. He suddenly laughed. Since this person wasn't willing, then he would take the initiative. He also wanted to see what Dowling Vast Habitat had prepared for him. He suddenly flew up and charged into the air. "Jia Mingluo, do you dare to have another battle with me?" His voice spread 1,000 miles and the entire battle could be heard clearly. The Night Demon army was silent at first, then they heard a cold snort. "Why not? I have the same intention." A person suddenly charged into the clouds. He spread out his 300-foot bat wings and charged into the clouds. He stood still 30,000 miles away and looked at Zhong Shou from afar. His brow rose up and he felt that the person in front of him was different from before. Especially his aura, it was vast, surging, and endless. Clearly, he was at his peak. Spirit realm? No, Cloud World Grade 9. At this moment, Zhong Shou was already late Heaven Realm. Who knows what method he used, but it gave one the feeling that a spirit realm expert was standing in front of him. Then, Jia Mingluo didn't care. Heaven realm was fine, spirit realm was fine. During these few days, the reason why Zhong Shou was able to fight to a standstill with him was because of his strong sword technique and not his own internal energy. Even if his cultivation was a little stronger, it wouldn't be a problem for him. However, he couldn't help but mock. I have to congratulate Ruler for your cultivation improvement. Speaking of which, Ruler can't win today. Do you have the confidence to kill me with your sword? Kill you with my sword? That is what I have in mind. Zhong Shou smiled and wasn't in a rush to attack. It was okay to have a chat before the battle. Speaking of which, who was the one who suffered heavy losses? We can't win on this battlefield. Where did that come from? Jia Mingluo's chest tightened. He had expected those words. However, the first sentence really surprised him. To kill him, Zhong Shou was really shameless. However, one could also hear the extreme confidence in his words, as well as the cold killing intent that was not concealed at all. This was something that had never happened in the past. It is just a small loss. Your middle army commander's skill in using troops is truly awe-inspiring. However, it is only limited to this one time. He shook his head. He wasn't so narrow-minded that he wasn't willing to admit reality. However, you should know who has the upper hand. At most, you can only block me until noon tomorrow. However, Zhong Shou, do you really want to die together? At this moment, the Night Demon army was forced to a corner by the person in front of him. Even if he managed to break through the 7 Extremes mountain today, he would still lose around 600,000. Within a few years, before the Night Demon reinforcements arrived, they could only defend this island in Huizhou. This definitely wasn't what Jia Mingluo wanted. Zhong Shou smiled. Noon tomorrow? That was what he had expected as well. However, Jia Mingluo was the same as he was 7 days ago, missing out on something. To have Kong Yao by his side, Zhong Yuan, Ren Tianxing, Zhong Gang, and Zhong Yuan by his side, it was indeed his fortune. Today, he could deal with this battle wholeheartedly. He also didn't need to worry about the battle situation below. With a slight movement of his mind in a second, the black lightning wings had already spread out. Lightning blaze, thousand flash, numerous black flames spread all about. His black hair turned ashen white in just a breath. Sword intent charged up, causing the cloud energy within 100 miles to be repelled in all directions. Below, all the people who died, be it night demon or human race. All the Een souls that hadn't dissipated roared and charged into the sky. Een River Gathering, 9 Nethergate. This sword is connected to the underworld, announcing your death. The sword pointed in front of him, only to hear a loud explosion behind him. Numerous Een winds crazily surged over from all directions. Zhong Shou pointed his sword tip into the distance. The ruby necklace on his neck suddenly shook intensely and struggled out from his chest. It danced and gave off an intense red light. Chapter 669. What sword technique was that? Jia Mingluo had conquered many worlds for hundreds of years and was really knowledgeable. However, at this moment, he couldn't help but be stunned. He could see that Zhong Shou was using the sword in his hand to control the death energy. However, why was this death energy able to coexist with King Path martial arts and not conflict with each other? Under Zhong Shou's rule, it wasn't some netherworld country. He had many questions in his heart, but looking at Zhong Shou's actions and expression, he knew that there was no way out between the two of them. Today, the two of them had to die. He didn't have time to think about it. Numerous red star god lightning suddenly exploded out and spread across the sky. In the next instance, Zhong Shou's sword slashed down from the sky. The death energy was really deep and the sword's shadow seemed to exist between the worlds of life and death, ethereal and hard to grasp. The vast gray-white energy and the millions of Ean's souls roared crazily, caused the entire world to turn black and white. With just one sword, he ripped open the red lightning net and directly appeared 200 feet in front of him. It was just some death energy and Ean's souls that couldn't see the light, but at this moment, they didn't fear the lightning at all. Instead, they looked like they were about to crush it. Prince Jia Mingluo felt his entire body freeze up, the coldness seeping into his bones. The energy in his body was disappearing bit by bit under the attack of the death energy. His heart nearly stopped beating. Was he terrified? What kind of sword technique was that? Why did it feel like he was already dead before the sword even arrived? Such a thought rose up in his heart once more. Just as the sword shadow was about to reach his body, he roared. With a furious roar, the vital energy in his body suddenly surged and flowed in reverse. It gave off a magma-like heat that chased all the Ean souls out of his body. He pulled out his blade and slashed down furiously. The blade and sword clashed. He used a huge amount of strength to scatter the sword shadow in one strike. He didn't hesitate to charge in front of Zhong Shou. To prevent Zhong Shou from using the sword technique that was stronger than him, he had to use this close combat technique. In the past 3 months, he had been tested time and time again. After dozens of battles, there were several times where he forced the Gantian mountain monster king to the brink. But today, as soon as he got close to her, he already felt that she was a little different from before. The Ean and cold death energy that was expelled lingered around his body at all times. It was all-pervasive, seeping into his body at every opportunity. The slightest bit of carelessness, the slightest flaw, would allow the slightest trace of life force to invade the body. Saber light and sword shadows flashed in the void one after another. However, every time they clashed, a series of sparks would fly in all directions. The buzzing sound from the blades spread out 100 miles. At the start, Jia Mingluo didn't think about anything. He only followed the instincts of his body that had been tempered through countless trials and tribulations. He kept striking with his saber again and again. He only hoped that the saber would be stronger and faster. The remaining bit of thought he had was to drive the red lightning saber intent while paying attention to the path of Zhong Shou's sword. He didn't want to fall into his trap. Slowly, he felt that the heavy saber in his hand was covered in a gray-white energy that slowly spread up to the handle. The saber body was also shaking and shedding bits of metal dust. This was the sign that the saber in his hand was aging and decaying, continuously collapsing. He couldn't help but suck in a cold breath. The saber in his hand was a true grade 8 magical weapon, and it actually couldn't block the attack of the death energy? Saber after saber pressed down, causing Zhong Shou's sword light to be compressed to 100 feet around him, unable to stretch out anymore. However, after 1,000 strikes, Jia Mingluo's body suddenly retreated explosively. Not only did he throw away all the advantages that he had accumulated before, he also risked being chased by Zhong Shou to retreat 10,000 feet. Red star god lightning, the vital energy in his body surged backward once more. Jia Mingluo exhaled and spat out a thick gray-white energy, expelling a large portion of the meditation energy that gathered in his body. The saber in his hand also rang out. The countless grayish-white gas was also completely cleansed. Then, he looked towards Zhong Shou with a look of fear. He only felt that this sword technique wasn't as exquisite as the 9-9 Long Ing sword, and there weren't many changes. However, it was more deceitful and indiscernible. Compared to the Long Ing sword, it was more suitable for close combat. Especially the Ean death energy which stole one's life force. If one's cultivation was slightly weaker, they would die on the spot. In terms of the grade of this sword technique, it was tough to evaluate it. In terms of power, at the extreme, it was grade 10 Saint Spirit level. It could even be compared to grade 11 magical techniques. However, to use this sword, one had to pay a huge price. Holding the heavy saber, Even when Jia Mingluo was trying his best to expel the death energy in his body, he still left 70% of his strength and a large portion of his spiritual sense to be wary of Zhong Shou's actions. At this moment, he suddenly raised his eyelids and looked forwards expressionlessly. How much lifespan has Ruler consumed to use this sword? Ruler also has less than 30 years left, so how much longer can you last? Zhong Shou was quietly sensing his body, and had no intention to chase. When he heard this, he broke out into a laugh. Actually, he didn't understand why his lifespan didn't decrease when he used this sword technique. The death energy wrapped around his body and only used up a little bit of life force. It wasn't much. Coincidentally, Little Gold and Hanshi turned into specks of light and flew over, landing on his shoulder. In terms of soul power, he had a total of 200,000 Yin souls in the air. Although this number was much smaller than that day when they broke through Lianyun Island. However, in terms of soul strength, these 200,000 Yin souls were far stronger. This was why the Styx River Death sword that he used now was far stronger than that day by power. It was enough to support the consumption of the nameless sword in his hand. However, at this moment, these two fellows brought him the souls of a few grade 7 night demons. After Heaven Realm, these people's souls had the ability to resist his Styx River sword and weren't summoned over. At this moment, Little Gold and Hanshi captured them. Zhong Shou didn't hesitate to toss them into the nameless sword. Within his soul ocean, the green flames burned once more. The light-containing pill in just a few short breaths caused the internal energy that he consumed to recover. The spiritual meridians in his body were also recovering spiritual energy at a shocking speed. If it was in the past, it definitely wouldn't be able to last so long. Zhong Shou laughed out loud, and then there was a loud cracking sound behind him. It was as if something had cracked open, and even more death Inchi gushed out like a dam bursting open. The current surged and covered 300 miles of the sky. Zhong Shou charged up, following which he brought with him thousands of ashen white sword energy as he slashed down, covering Jia Mingluo's body within. He gave up on all sword technique changes and only sought a stronger, faster, and more unpredictable Styx death sword. Jia Mingluo's pupils constricted. In another breath, his aura recovered to its peak. Without hesitation, the blade in his hand charged up once more. It was even more domineering and sharp. At this moment, not only was Zhong Shou's killing intent and fighting spirit unprecedentedly strong. Jia Mingluo was the same. If he could kill this brat earlier, the situation of the remaining troops under his command would be a little better. After the exchange, both of their figures trembled slightly. Blood seeped out from the corner of their lips. The astral energy that came from the blade was something that the two of them couldn't take. However, what followed was an even fiercer collision. Blade light and sword shadow seemed to turn into two gusts of wind, intersecting with one another and not separating. In the blink of an eye, there were thousands of strikes. A dark cloud appeared in Jia Mingluo's eyes. This swordsmanship, the more souls it gathered, the more powerful it would be? Looking down, there were many people who died in battle. Those who were lucky enough not to have their souls wiped out were sucked into the sky by the suction force of Zhong Shou's sword before they were able to scatter. No wonder Zhong Shou didn't use those spells to restrict them. As a night demon, this was the first time Jia Mingluo looked forward to the rising sun. Looking at the horizon again, there should still be more than 2 hours before dawn. It was not far from the sun rising. The only thing that made him happy was that even in the center, they were still in a stalemate. The main general under Zhong Shou used just 800,000 soldiers to block the same number of night demons outside of the gap. However, on the two wings they were making progress. If this continued, at most at noon, they would be able to reach the peak of Seven Cloud Mountain and break away from this situation. They might even wipe out these 2 million enemies. Dawn is about to arrive. Beside the cliff, A wide and giant stone altar stretched out from the high cliff. It was 1,000 feet wide and protruded out of the mountain. It could barely be called majestic. Especially recently after it was renovated, it was even more so. At this moment, Kong Rui was standing in the center of the altar, pointing the whole of the One King divination coin at his eyes, looking out into the sky at the starry sky in the north. This place was the heaven-worshipping altar of Gantian Mountain, one of the restricted areas of Gantian Mountain City. However, as the imperial astronomer, he naturally had the right to appear here. The method of divination either relied on the massive amount of earth chi to make predictions, or to break away from the image of the heaven and earth energy on the person casting the spell. The altar here wasn't connected to the sky, but one could look at the stars. This time, it only connected to a little bit of earth energy. It could be considered a great place to cast the spell. White energy at its peak, starlight blooming, Kong Rui's emotions couldn't be suppressed. In roughly 2 hours, all the people in the cloud world who grasped stargazing techniques would be able to see the glow of the Alcade army destroying star, right? At that time, even if the sun was in the sky, it wouldn't be able to cover the glow of the Alcade army destroying star. Not long after that, it would be the time when Yao shocked the world. He had won the bet with Zhongshuan. However, at this moment, the words he said before were just empty words. Who knows if Zhongshuan would be able to see such a scene now? However, at this moment, what he cared about the most was the death calamity that his daughter was about to face. In the next moment, Kong Rui let out an slightly surprised. Chapter 670. Only to see that in the silence, the black and evil energy wrapping around the bright white star was getting thicker and thicker. However, from start to finish, it was excluded from the star. He could vaguely feel that this star was being protected by an inexplicably powerful force. Evil was hard to offend, the evil energy wouldn't increase. Kong Rui heaved a sigh of relief. Since it was such a sign, then it would be scary but not dangerous. However, whether or not they could pass this calamity depended on the Monster King. For Kong Yao to not be affected by the evil energy till now, she was definitely protected by the king path luck of this kid. If Zhong Shou was safe, then his daughter would naturally be fine. However, if anything happened to the Monster King, Yao wouldn't be able to survive alone. Placing down the divination money, Kong Rui frowned slightly. Logically speaking, with the stars, Yao should have a high chance of breaking through her own fate. However, in his heart, he felt really uneasy. Astronomer Kong, what is the outcome? The person who asked came from outside the altar. An old man in his 70s was sitting there, asking anxiously. It was Zhong Ling. He was originally the priest of Gantian Mountain and was in charge of Kong Rui. However, when Zhong Shou established the country and built a cabinet with 6 ministries, he became the head of Taichung Temple to manage the imperial astronomer. However, he knew that his ability to observe the stars and predict people's fate was far from that of others. This was why after Kong Rui took over, Zhong Ling let go of everything and left all these divination matters to Kong Rui. At this moment, not only him, beside the altar, Hu Qianqiu, Chai Yuan, the elders and ministers of the country were all anxiously waiting. Renbo was also waiting at the side, his brows tightly furrowed. Confucius does not speak of strange forces and gods. The sage once said that one should keep a respectful distance from ghosts and gods. He originally didn't care much about divination. However, today was just too important for Gantian Mountain. However, if they waited for news from Huizhou, it would take half a day. He took a deep look at Kong Rui. This person had just come to Gantian Mountain for half a year. However, he was able to predict people's fates and predict their fortune. In a short time, everyone in Gantian Mountain knew about it. Along with his daughter, not only was she taken in as a concubine by Zhong Shou, but she was also trusted and controlled millions of troops. Which was why at this moment, Even elders like Hu Qianqiu and Chai Yuan had to be respectful. This person's attainments in the field of magic might truly be extraordinary. Perhaps he could really make a deduction before the news from the other side came back. Hearing this, Kong Rui shook his head and looked in front of him without saying a word. 100 feet away, there was a three-legged bronze cauldron. Below burned a raging purple flame, known as the purest purple heart coal. After it burned, not a single trace of ash would be left behind. The flame was even more powerful, and it was often used to offer sacrifices to the heavens. At this moment, there was nothing else in the enormous cauldron. There was only a completely intact tortoise shell the size of 3 palms. The evolution of the celestial bodies often corresponded to changes in the human world. His attainments in this aspect were not inferior to Zhong Xian. However, among all the arts of divination, in terms of accuracy, the turtle divination was still the best. The tortoise shell didn't crack, so even he didn't dare to make a conclusion. He waited quietly for a full hour, but there was still no movement within the cauldron. Impatience gradually appeared on the faces of the people outside the altar. Kong Rui also frowned slightly. The tortoise shell he used was a grade 5 hidden spirit turtle. Although it was far from the Xuanwu bloodline, its lifespan could be counted in tens of thousands of years. The shell was one of the best divination materials. However, why was it so slow today? Thinking about it for a moment, Kong Rui suddenly stood up and walked beside the copper cauldron. He suddenly cut open his wrist, and threads of fresh blood dripped into the cauldron. Moments later, with a cracking sound, dozens of cracks appeared on the tortoise shell. Kong Rui looked carefully, and then his tense heart finally relaxed, only to see that the tortoise shell was covered in cracks. Streaks of deep scars broke toward the center. However, when the purple flames were extinguished, the central region was still perfectly fine. The king was in the center and this place was fine, which meant that Zhong Shou would be able to survive this calamity. Then, he looked carefully in the other directions. He saw that the cracks were like many knives, spears, swords, and halberds, pointing towards the center. It was a shocking sight. A moment later, Kong Rui's eyelids suddenly twitched. He saw that there were some changes on the tortoise shell. When it slowly cooled down, the right side of the shell was still black. However, a small half of the left side had turned red. Zhong Shou's king energy carried the fire virtue. The country today was also filled with qi. Was this a sign that the monster king was going to become the southeast overlord of this world? The moment such a thought rose up, Kong Rui didn't have time to analyze the rest. He only felt that there was a bolt of lightning in the sky that suddenly struck down. It smashed the three-legged copper cauldron into pieces. Kong Rui stumbled, taking several steps back before he was able to stabilize himself. His face was ashen white as he looked into the sky. The heavens were trying to kill him, not wanting him to know the secrets. As they said, the secrets of the heavens couldn't be revealed easily. He instantly hesitated. Should he tell these people what he saw just now? In the next instance, Kong Rui met Xianyuan Iran's pure and hopeful eyes. He could only shake his head in annoyance. Ruler will definitely be fine this time. I estimate that in another 4 to 5 hours, we will receive news of our victory. The moment these words were said, the people outside of the altar all relaxed. Kong Rui was in deep thought, thinking back to the weird scenes that he saw before the copper cauldron was destroyed. This Zhong Shou's fate was related to the stars of heaven and earth, affecting the fate and destiny of the cloud world in the next 10,000 years, which was why there were such changes today. However, at this moment, he was still unable to find out where Zhong Shou's fate star was. He could only guess that there were numerous weapons, ocean amounts of corpses, blood and fire coexisting, burning everything almost at the same time. A cauldron exploded in a Taoist temple in the imperial capital nearly 100,000 kilometers away. The 999 zhang tall stargazing platform stood tall. Looking down from here, one could see a huge yin-yang 8 trigrams stone formation. At this moment, on the platform, Taishang Grand Teacher Zhongshuan seemed to have suddenly aged by dozens of years. His hair and beard were all white and his face was filled with exhaustion. His eyelids trembled as he raised his brow and looked at the broken cauldron 100 feet away, as well as the burn marks from the lightning strike. His eyes were filled with disbelief. Then how could the East win? Although they were defending in a dangerous place, they had no reinforcements and were also being attacked from the front and back. Jia Mingluo looked down on people of the same grade. In the cloud world, he was a top expert who had no opponent. Even if they couldn't win, they wouldn't lose. Along with the various arrangements of the Taoist faction, this person would definitely die. He remembered that yesterday, His Majesty had gathered the Taishang generals and officials to work together to deduce the battle situation. The best result would be to persevere until noon. After noon, they would collapse and all of them would die. What was the chance of the Gantian army winning? If they couldn't stop the night demons from outside, then they should just lead them into the cloud world. Not only could they restrict the rising strong country in Donglin Cloud Continent, but they could also cause the east vassals of the central cloud continent to shift their focus to the east and not dare to act rashly. It could allow the Taishang to take out enough troops and time to calm down their internal problems. This was the country policy that His Majesty and the various officials had discussed. However, thinking about it now, he only found it amusing. It was too much of a given. Zhongshuan's eyes were filled with confusion. He barely stood up and then walked shakily towards the giant cauldron. Just now, he wanted to peek into the secrets of the heavens, using 90% of his soul power. When the heavenly tribulation descended, the backlash they received was also incomparably heavy. It nearly caused his physical body to shatter. At this moment, he forced himself to walk in front of the cauldron placed in the yin-yang fish diagram. Although the three-legged cauldron had melted, there were still some broken turtle shell pieces left. The reason why it wasn't destroyed was because the intent it contained could be shown to people. Zhongshuan picked it up and placed it in front of him to piece it back together. After a long while, he heaved a heavy sigh. As expected, he is safe and sound. As expected, he is the Southeast Overlord. Speaking of which, Monster King Zhong Shou was most probably going to win this battle. If he didn't, his body would be in danger of dying. His elite troops would all die under Seven Cloud Mountain. Where did the Southeast Overlord come from? This red intent spread out and directly reached the southeast of the Cloud Continent. However, no matter how he guessed, he couldn't think of how Zhong Shou won. At this moment, a streak of starlight stabbed into his eyes. Zhongshuan raised his head in shock, following which his gaze locked onto the alcade at the handle of the Big Dipper. Army breaking appearing, suppressing 10,000 troops. Lighting up the southeast. What a familiar aura. Who does it correspond to? Oh right, it is Kong Yao. In my memory, there is only her. However, when did this woman's bad luck end? At this moment, although she was in danger, she was actually safe. Someone was using luck to protect her. He remembered that this woman did indeed have much of the army breaking star's vengeful energy. However, as a woman, she shouldn't have been able to take it. As such, her life was bad and she should have died early. How did she suddenly become a light-breaking star, causing the stars to shine brightly? These changes were really incomprehensible. Speaking of which, this woman had led 1,000,000 troops to fight against the night demons. She planned out the strategy and decided the battle from 1,000 miles away. Her ability to use troops really made one's eyes light up. Even the Taishang and a few experienced old generals exclaimed that they weren't as good as her. To say that this woman was a light-shaking realm descendant, she did have some right. Thinking about it, Zhongshuan suddenly had an idea. He felt his chest tighten and a mouthful of purple blood was spat out from his mouth. So that was the case. This woman was not only a commander talent, but she needed to lead a huge army to be able to show it. Her fate was also really obscure. She needed to lead 1,000,000 troops and have the seal of a country before she could truly become an army-breaking star. He was unparalleled in divination and was able to predict one's fate. Who knew that he had misjudged this woman? A famous commander, a military god descending. This Kong Yao should have been the pillar of their Taishang. Chapter 671. However, why did such a person go to Gantian and become a subject under Zhongshuo? It was him, it was the Kong family. Zhongshuan suddenly understood something. So it wasn't Kong Yao's fate that dragged down Taishang. It was the fate of Taishang. It was because of the Kong family which caused Kong Yao to show signs of decline. Now that she broke out of the cage, naturally she would soar into the heavens and roar 1,000 miles. He remembered that year when Kong Rui argued with him. He was sure that Kong Yao would definitely become a great person. Zhongshuan's chest was filled with rage. He lost the bet, but the father and daughter weren't in Taishang anymore. At this moment, it was too late for him to regret. Taking in a deep breath, Zhongshuan forced himself to calm down. Men! With a call, a Taoist who looked around 20 hurriedly walked up the stargazing platform. Go inform His Majesty. No matter what, even if all the spirit realm experts in the palace die, he must kill that Zhongshuo at the foot of 7 Cloud Mountain. The Taoist was startled when he heard that and was about to speak. However, Zhongshuan suddenly shook his head. No. This kid's momentum is already formed and can't be reversed. Even if the experts in the palace rush over, it would be too late. Go inform His Majesty, and he can send a talisman to Donglin. We can't participate in Dowling Vast Habitat's secret plan. If he wasn't heavily injured and couldn't walk, he would have rushed over. He really wanted to charge into the palace right now. The Taoist's brows furrowed once more and finally found a chance to speak. Did you forget? His Majesty has entered Hidden Dragon Mountain to go into seclusion. He needs 7 days before he comes out. Zhongshuan was startled, and then a determined expression appeared on his face. Then let's invite the Empress to make a trip to Hidden Dragon Mountain. This matter is really important and we can't waste any time. At the foot of the 7 Cloud Mountain, Hu Zhongyuan stood with his saber. His chest heaved up and down violently as he panted heavily. Xiao Chen was already fatigued, and his entire body was riddled with wounds. He only had less than 5% of his aura left, barely able to draw his saber. However, he still stood tall and straight like a mountain. He was like a pillar that supported the heavens, standing in the middle of the army. I can't hold on any longer. Although his face was incomparably cold, he was as calm and collected as he was at the start of the battle. However, Hu Zhongyuan couldn't help but have such a thought flash across his mind. 17 of the dozens of stone castles on his right flank had already been breached. As far as the eye could see, there were broken stone walls and stone barricades everywhere. Without these structures, they could only rely on their flesh and blood to resist the Night Demon Army's attacks. Luckily, Kong Yao had placed thousands of 5-armed spiritual crossbows on the mountain. Only then could he barely hold on and not collapse. Nearly 40% of the 600,000 soldiers on the right flank were dead or injured. However, Hu Zhongyuan felt proud. In front of his army lay no less than 70,000 night demon corpses. With their weaker combat strength, they were able to cause close to 2-to-1 casualties. This could be considered his most outstanding battle result in these 3 months. However, each time he looked to the left, towards the center of the army, Hu Zhongyuan would sigh. One really couldn't compare to one another. They fought intensely for an entire night and 12 to 14 hours had passed. Rentianxing's side was still firmly blocking the main force of the night demons. With the same number of people, they were able to cause heavy casualties. They even had to stop their attacks to prevent more casualties. They were looking forward to the two wings breaking through. The 300,000 cavalry led by Zhong Yuan were the most relaxed. However, opposite them, there were 600,000 night demon troops who were waiting solemnly, not daring to move at all. Hu Zhongyuan knew that the two of them had already gone all out. Restricting half of the night demon Tai's army was already the limit of what the two of them could do. He could only blame himself for not having the ability to use troops like the two of them. Instincts that were close to talent allowed Ren Tianxing and Zhong Yuan to easily grasp the smallest weakness of the enemy and counterattack. His gaze dimmed as he looked towards the east. The sunlight was eye-catching, causing him to close his eyes. It was already the end of the day, close to noon. The sun was in the sky, shining brightly for 10,000 miles. Meanwhile, in the surroundings of this seven-cloud mountain, countless dark clouds and water vapor could be seen. They were guided by a wave of power, gathering in this direction. However, each time it got close to 300 miles from the battlefield, a hot energy pillar would charge up from the back of Seven Cloud Mountain. Then, numerous intense winds would spread out in all directions. The dark clouds were all pushed away into the distance. This caused the surrounding 800 miles of the battlefield to be bright and sunny. The rays of sunlight were like sharp arrows as they landed, causing the combat strength of the night demon soldiers to decrease by 30 to 40%. Many of their expressions twisted in pain, their skin cracked and festered. However, even then, it wasn't something that the soldiers under him could block. Instead, it was like their vicious nature was ignited as they charged forwards without any regard for their lives. Suddenly, incomparably gory scenes jumped into the corner of his vision. Hu Zhongyuan's pupils constricted as he looked over. He saw an agile leopard-like body smashing into a square formation to his right. He swiftly charged forwards, holding two crescent blades. Everywhere he passed, blood and meat splattered. No one was able to block this person for even a moment. Numerous broken limbs flew up into the air. The already thin and shaky spear array instantly became even more chaotic. "You're asking to die," Hu Zhongyuan hollered, pretty much without even thinking. He rode his beast out and slashed out with his blade. The sharp blade shadow brought with it an energy glow that was so small that it couldn't be seen. The weakness of the energy in his body was revealed. That person scoffed coldly after giving out a vicious smile. He also charged forwards. The two crescent blades formed thousands of blade shadows, covering Hu Zhongyuan's entire body within. One side was so tired that they wanted to die, while the other side had been resting up for a long time. Both of them had the same cultivation, but when the Tiger King knife smashed into the sky full of blade light, it was like a hot knife through butter as it slashed in. The tempering on the battlefield had made his current saber technique extremely concise. Going forward with no return, it was really overbearing but also really sharp and agile. It didn't waste any strength, and also wouldn't cause the strength of the blade to weaken because of saving strength. In the past, Zhong Shou would occasionally give him pointers. At this moment, he had grasped all of it and merged it into the Tiger King knife. Although his energy was exhausted, it didn't mean that he couldn't break strength and quickly break strength. After a few consecutive strikes, there was a pu sound as the head of the night demon was sliced off. The Tiger King knife shadow also retracted. Hu Zhongyuan was too lazy to even look at the corpse as he rode his horse back to his original spot. The surrounding soldiers also cheered, and their morale was boosted once again. At this moment, a small half of the grade 7 experts of the Night Demon had already fallen. Out of the 20, 16 of them died under his and Chai Yuan's blades. However, when Hu Zhongyuan steered his mount with a calm expression and stood up again, his heart had already sunk to the bottom of the valley. He didn't know whether or not he would be able to wave his blade once more, how much internal energy would he be able to use. He also didn't know when this defensive line would be broken. It shouldn't be far away, at most it wouldn't be more than an hour. The outcome of this battle had already been decided. There wouldn't be any other possibilities. The reason why he was still standing here was because he was trying his best to recover his energy. It wasn't because he still had hope in his heart. It was just to deal with the following battle to the death. It was a true battle to the death. Even if he, Hu Zhongyuan, died in battle, he would die heroically. If he didn't chop off 1,000 more night demon heads before he died, how would he be willing? He turned around and exchanged glances with Chai Zhou at the side, only to see that his best friend when he was young was broken from his knees down. He was unable to walk and could only sit on his mount. This was a grade 8 night demon who had attacked and heavily injured Chai Zhou. He, Hu Zhongyuan, had also expended 50 to 60% of his strength for this. Naturally, this person wasn't having a good time either. His left rib was slashed by his blade. At this moment, a long time had passed and he still hadn't appeared. If he wasn't dead, then he was so badly injured that he couldn't fight anymore. Chai Zhou was really calm and knew that he was about to die. There was no trace of fear or sadness on his face either. At this moment, he frowned and looked into the sky. Why is ruler still fighting with Jia Mingluo? If we don't retreat now, when will we? Zhong Yuan's brow rose up when he heard this. Worry flashed in his eyes. Looking out, only Zhong Shou's body was still in the sky, fighting with Jia Mingluo. Sword light swept and surged thousands of miles. The intense battle was intense, and he had no intentions of retreating. He was actually suppressing Prince Jia Mingluo by a little. However, at this moment, he was far from being able to beat Jia Mingluo. From the looks of it, the two of them were about the same, sharing the limelight on equal footing. At this moment, the spirit realm experts of the night demons were all restricted and unable to help. However, if the left and right wings collapse, if the night demons attacked, the outcome would be unpredictable. However, Zhong Shou had no intentions of retreating. Although the two of them were anxious, they couldn't say anything to remind him. Although they lost this battle, if Zhong Shou returned to Donglin safely, Gantian Mountain would still be as stable as Mount Tai. The thousands of dragon horn-winged horses of the Blood Cloud Cavalry could fly across mountains. If they wanted to leave, no one could stop them. They only needed unparalleled general talents like Rin Tianxing and Zhong Yuan to protect them. Then, once Gantian Mountain stabilized, they could attack Huizhou once more and chase away the night demons. Just as he was feeling annoyed, he uneasily grabbed the handle of the knife in his hand. Hu Zhongyuan suddenly saw a golden light land from the peak of Seven Cloud Mountain. It was a talisman. Hu Zhongyuan's brow rose up as he grabbed it. As expected, it was an order from Kong Yao. This woman's attainments in battle might not be as good as Rin Tianxing and Zhong Yuan, but she was much better than him. Looking down from above, she saw the entire battle situation. Many things that he couldn't notice due to his limited vision were things that Kong Yao knew like the back of her hand. Being reminded by her, Hu Zhongyuan managed to turn the situation around several times. However, when the contents of the talisman entered his eyes, Hu Zhongyuan opened his eyes and was slightly shocked. Defend, accumulate strength, victory is near, prepare to chase victory? Chase? Was this woman crazy? Chapter 672. The battle situation below, as well as the two people who were fighting intensely in the air, was clear to everyone, even if he was fully focused on the weapon in his hand. With just a bit of thought, he could see everything on the battlefield like the back of his hand, not missing anything out at all. Jia Mingluo fought back to defend. His expression was really calm. At this point, the Night Demon army had already lost over 600,000 troops. Close to a third of the army had already fallen beneath Seven Cloud Mountain. At this moment, whether or not the two of them won or lost didn't matter to the overall situation. Early in the morning, he had already given up on killing Zhong Shou. If he couldn't do it at night, then there was no way he could do it in the day. At this moment, Zhong Shou didn't use the Styx River Death sword that gave one a headache. However, his attacks were still like a wave, not stopping at all. However, in his eyes, this was no different from a struggle before death. It wasn't easy for him to kill Zhong Shou, but for this Zhong Shou to want to kill him before his army collapsed was just a dream. Laughing coldly, Jia Mingluo's heavy blade rose up, pushing aside the sword light that slashed over from an unbelievable direction. His left hand punched out, bringing with it a ball of extremely strong red star god lightning as it smashed out. It forcefully dissipated the thousands of void blades that were slashing down from the opposite side. He was fully prepared to deal with the final craziness of the opponent. Zhong Shou's body suddenly flashed and he retreated 10,000 feet. Although the two of them were fighting in close combat, if they were careless they could die here. However, at this moment, Zhong Shou was suppressing him. Naturally, he could advance and retreat as he wished, leaving whenever he wanted to. Jia Mingluo's brow rose up and then he scoffed coldly. In the end, he was still going to leave. He thought that this ruler was going to fight to the death with him here, to die with the millions of troops below. However, Zhong Shou stood 10,000 feet away and didn't have any intentions of fleeing. The 9 longing dragons behind him were still flying and circling around, roaring angrily. Their aura was monstrous. The unknown sword in his hand was 1,000 feet long, swallowing and spitting out unpredictably, twisting and turning like the Long Ing sword. Zhong Shou seemed to be listening attentively, waiting for something. The outcome of today's battle has been decided. Just as you and I expected last night, although I, Jia Mingluo, have lost, I can still use Huizhou as a foundation to plan for my future. On the other hand, the country ruler, millions of elites, and countless generals will all die here. He chuckled softly. It was unclear whether he was mocking Zhong Shou or mocking himself. Jia Mingluo was expressionless as he held his blade. If you don't leave now, you won't have a chance. All of my plans and ambitions have been destroyed in the hands of the monarch. If I have the chance, I won't let you leave this place alive. There was no fluctuation in his tone, but his killing intent was overflowing and cold, without any intention of concealing it. There was also a faint trace of resentment mixed in. Shortly after, Jia Mingluo felt that something wasn't right. Using his spiritual sense, he finally knew why the person opposite him suddenly stopped. He instantly laughed out loud, shaking the clouds. So that is the case, so that is the case. So the Oriole has arrived. You and I are fighting here, but instead we are benefiting the fisherman. However, this fisherman can't do anything to me, so he is most probably going to attack the monarch. When he said this, a few people walked out from the clouds 100 miles away. There were a total of 7 of them, all wearing green robes and holding swords in their hands. They stepped on a 5-colored glow as they walked over. There was another green-robed Taoist who was standing not far behind Zhong Shou, roughly 20 miles away. His face was cold and expressionless as he bowed towards Zhong Shou. Ruler, it has been 3 months since we last met. I am here on orders from the vast Habitat Palace head to take your life. Samuraim's eyes flashed as he looked at the 7 of them walking over. He only felt that in these 7 directions, there was a thin and sharp sword intent that was remotely controlling his mind. Is this your Taoist faction's so-called true martial 7-point formation? He knew that the Tao soldiers of the various sects were split into heaven, earth, Xian, and yellow. For example, Song Shengdao's common people's mysterious dragon warriors and Tailing sect's purple cloud sword cavalry were Xian grade. These 7 people should be the so-called true martial swordsmen of Daoling Vast Habitat, the legendary Earth-grade Dao soldiers. With just 100 Xian-grade Dao soldiers, they could crush tens of thousands of enemies. Each of the 7 people in front of him could fight against 300 common people's mysterious dragon warriors. although the 7 of them were only initial spirit realm. However, if they worked together and used this true martial 7-point formation, they could even go up against Heaven Realm experts and kill them. How was Zhong Shou so lucky? He actually made the Taoist faction use such a killing weapon. Ruler really recognizes it. This is the true martial 7-point formation. Minghui nodded his head slightly, his hand holding the sword. A clear sword intent also locked onto Zhong Shou from afar. Donglin Cloud Continent, billions of people were originally under my Lingyun sect's rule, but now the ruler has stolen them. After today, I will return them to their rightful owners, but the ruler won't easily agree. Which is why today I will definitely kill you. However, I also know that although you are only grade 9, you can use the Avicii throne and your King Path martial arts. Within 20,000 miles, your combat strength can reach Heaven Realm, and you are pretty much invincible. Thinking about it, within the cloud world, only these 7 pieces of the true martial body can cause the ruler to hate here. He said flatly, but there was a special rhythm to his words. Not only did it cause people to feel a chill in their hearts, it also caused them to feel depressed. Zhong Shou smiled and retracted his gaze. Actually, he couldn't see much. Half a breath ago, everything around him had turned pitch black. It wasn't that the sky above 7 Cloud Mountain was covered by darkness. Instead, at this moment, he had already been dragged into another miniature space by someone's great magic power. From afar, he could sense that there were 2 people each holding a magical artifact to maintain this dark space. An external power separated the inside from the outside. He didn't recognize the 2 of them, but their cultivations were close to Spirit Realm. These 2 artifacts are called the Space Falling Star Sinking Plate. I brought them here for no other purpose except to stop the ruler from escaping. Also, there is that Ao Kuan Saint Ruler. You don't have to rely on him. Our Dowling vast habitat can make him unable to move. Minghui smiled and then turned to look at Jia Mingluo. This battle is between our Taoist faction and Gantian Mountain. It has nothing to do with Prince Jia Mingluo. However, if you are willing to help and work together to kill this person, I won't stop you. If you aren't willing, then you can leave. The enemy has descended, but you still want to kill one another. Is this the nature of your human race? When Jia Mingluo heard this, he immediately let out an arrogant and unruly laugh that was filled with mockery. Then, he mocked himself. Although I look down on all of you. However, such a strong enemy needs to be personally killed before I can be at ease. Since your Cloud World Taoist sect is willing to give me a chance, then how can I give it up? To me, it's better for Donglin Cloud Continent to fall into the hands of you useless trash than him. Minghui opened his eyes and didn't care at all. He was a little more at ease. With Jia Mingluo's help, they would have a high chance of winning today's battle. This Zhong Shou wouldn't have any chance of surviving. As for the mocking intent in Prince Jia Mingluo's words, he didn't care at all. The reason why this night demon army was able to descend in the cloud world was because of their strength. It wasn't because their combat strength was invincible. It was because the various sects weren't willing to lose strength before the situation changed. Each of them had their own plans, which was why they did that. If they were really serious, Dowling Vast Habitat could prevent Jia Mingluo's ruler from entering the cloud world. However, at this moment, although victory was in their hands, Zhong Shou didn't hesitate. Minghui was not in a hurry to make a move. This was the best opportunity. When the red armored army at the foot of the 7 Cloud Mountain was totally defeated. At that time, Zhong Shou's king energy would be weakened to the extreme. The 7 true martial swordsmen were all standing still in 7 different directions. Although they didn't pull out their swords, the true martial sword intent still seeped out of their bodies. It wasn't as sharp as the Kenzo sects, but it was calm and peaceful, filled with sharpness. Threads of sword energy flowed all about, slowly cutting apart Zhong Shou's spiritual sense that was connected to heaven and earth. Before he even stood up, energy spread all about as their spiritual senses clashed. However, Zhong Shou was smiling. His lips curled up, filled with a bone-chilling coldness. He was calm and indifferent. He turned his head and looked down into the distance. He was also quietly waiting for something. Although this place was separated from the outside by magical treasures, however, it didn't stop spiritual sense circulating spiritual energy to his eyes. He could still see the battle scenes below. Only to see that the sun was high up in the sky, many rainbow-colored lights were shining down from the east side of the ocean. It caused the entire seven-cloud mountain to be covered in seven-colored light. Let me ask you one more time, does your Dowling vast habitat really want to fight to the death with me? The moment he asked this, Ming Hui's brow rose up. He only found it amusing. Palace head's decree, ruler, please forgive us. Since things had reached such a stage, was Zhong Shou still hoping that there would be some leeway between the two sides? However, why was he still so confident and arrogant when he spoke? He was in a desperate situation, but there were no fluctuations in his emotions at all, only a cold decisiveness. Zhong Shou laughed. It was filled with a sense that he had expected it. In the next moment he shook his head. Jia Mingluo, if I were you, I would flee. At this moment I would flee. It is best if you left the cloud world, where I can't find you. Jia Mingluo was startled, totally confused. Following Zhong Shou's gaze, he looked into the distance. What jumped into his eyes was a seven-colored mirage. He had seen such a scene several times. He knew that it was a patch of cloudy light, reflecting the reflection of a large lake here. It caused this land to be beautiful. However, the night demons hated light. They only hated it and didn't admire it at all. Zhong Shou looked over, not knowing what it meant. Just as he was confused, he saw several spots of light light up in the mirage. The seven-colored light that shot over was too eye-catching. It caused his eyes to feel a piercing pain. With a thought, Prince Jia Mingluo's face instantly turned ashen white. Zhong Shou was smiling. He was as happy as before, but there was more of an unrestrained feeling in his heart. Chapter 673. Outside of the cloud world, within a dark void, Ao Kuan was lying on his back in the air. His eyes were soulless as he looked above. Where he looked, it was totally empty. He could only sense the two vague auras that pierced through the air. There wasn't much fighting spirit or killing intent, but there was a hint of warning. Ao Kuan didn't care at all. As long as those two didn't break the rules and directly attack that fellow, then it was okay. At this moment, in front of his eyes, there were numerous small dust particles which were being destroyed. This was the art of destruction. It would cause all matter to be completely destroyed from the foundation and cease to exist. Although he used the destruction dragon pellet to break through to the Saint Realm. However, his grasp of the destruction laws was still a little weak. This was why it would be like that every moment. By using his quintessence ability, he was able to grasp and identify the great Tao of destruction. Anyways, he was bored here. Ao Kuan's eyes were deep in thought. His destruction technique could only wipe out all things in the world. It seemed to have reached the extreme. However, if he wanted to improve further and reach the end realm, he had to do something else on this basis. Naturally, to him, this was an extremely far-away matter. However, now he should make some preparations. After all, he had consumed close to 10,000 years of lifespan in that stone wall. Even the dragon race didn't have endless lifespan. With a thought, Ao Kuan thought back to Zhong Shou. Although that fellow's cultivation wasn't at the spirit realm, he often had amazing ideas. His sword technique realm had reached the peak of the soul realm, comparable to the celestial realm. If he asked him, he might be able to learn something. Even if he could give him some inspiration, that would be great. Just a few years after rising up, Ao Kuan's spiritual sense sensed something. Those two strong intents were spreading out with all their might, cutting off his senses towards the cloud world. Ao Kuan was startled at first, then he laughed softly. He was still leisurely lying on his back, his eyes filled with a happy expression. If Zhong Shou was so easily tricked, he would not have placed all his hopes on him. These few Taoist experts had probably made a wrong move. He thought of Ao Kuan again. This time, he really didn't do anything. The Taoist school had already begun to oppose Zhong Shou. What would happen next? I'm really looking forward to it. A black light suddenly shot out from Ao Kuan's hand. Annihilation and shattering caused the void here to be riddled with holes. Countless spiritual energy storms covered the entire area. Since they weren't willing to let him look at the cloud world, then everyone should just forget about it. At the foot of 7 Sunset Mountain, Hu Zhongyuan was currently holding his hand to his forehead, staring blankly at the clouds to the east. His tiger eyes were filled with shock. Specks of light flashed and appeared in the 7-cloud mirage. Then, it slowly drowned out the watery light. At a glance, everything was glaring white. The brilliance of that light was even stronger than that of the blazing sun in the sky. Beams of white light shone down from the east, enveloping the entire 7-cloud mountain. In front of his army formation, a small half of the hundreds of thousands of night demons started to cry out under the blazing light. All grade 4 and below had their skin and flesh festering, giving out threads of green smoke. The remaining grade 4 night demon warriors all retreated, their faces filled with panic. After thinking about it for a while, Hu Zhongyuan came to a realization. There was definitely someone who was thousands of miles away casting a light element talisman in the lake that was reflected by the mirage. Moreover, the number was definitely in the tens of thousands, an unbelievably huge amount. Which was why the light of the mirage was comparable to the blazing sun. If these light talismans were used in battle on the battlefield, then the spirit masters of the night demon army could easily disperse it and counter it. However, the location where the light talismans exploded was a place they couldn't reach. Although the consumption was huge, it could suppress the enemy. Such thoughts flashed across Hu Zhongyuan's mind. Following which, he heard a thunder-like galloping sound. Looking out, he saw that on the left, Zhongyuan's 300,000 cavalry had started to gallop once more. 2 million horse hooves trampled, giving out a thunder-like sound. Like a giant drill, they charged towards the night demon army without any hesitation. Not only Zhongyuan, but the middle army led by Ren Tianxing was the same. The hundreds of thousands of people pressed forward. 20,000 Big Dipper sword soldiers broke out once more, charging into the enemy formation like a hot knife through butter. They didn't need to worry about the wings anymore, charging forwards. 20,000 shining swords waved, bringing about numerous blood rain. Hu Zhongyuan was stunned for dozens of breaths before he came back to his senses. Kong Yao was actually right. Victory, it was really a huge victory. A wave of ecstasy suddenly rushed to his chest. So it wasn't the time for him, Hu Zhongyuan, to die. Within his meridians, the internal energy that had dried up suddenly started to spurt out. His limbs, which were so tired that he couldn't raise them, suddenly had strength. Looking around, the surrounding soldiers, including Chai Zhou, were all looking at the sky, their eyes filled with disbelief. Frowning, Hu Zhongyuan raised his tiger overlord blade, took a deep breath, and then roared at the top of his lungs. K your ancestors. What are you all standing there for? Today, our army is going to win. You can chase and attack on your own. Before the sun sets, we won't seal our blades. Today, we won't leave any prisoners. We will wipe out all these night demons. Let's take revenge for our fallen brothers. The surroundings were deathly silent, everyone exchanging glances with one another in disbelief. Then, a wave of jubilant cheers resounded throughout the wilderness. The soldiers before the war were the first to raise their weapons. Before this, they felt that they were really strong and nimble. The enemy soldiers, who were difficult to deal with, were easily beheaded by them with a single slash of their sabers. They were so weak that they couldn't take a single hit. The entire enemy formation was collapsing. Numerous night demons, as long as they could move, were crazily fleeing. That formidable army from before had already disappeared like the wind and the clouds. At the same time, at the peak of Seven Cloud Mountain, within the region that was isolated by the space-falling star sinking plate, there were dozens of people here, each of them standing in a corner. Their faces were all really ugly. This was especially true for Prince Jia Mingluo. His originally dark face was now as pale as a sheet of paper. He looked down in a daze at the army that was fleeing in defeat. They had lost, they had totally lost, their ambitions had all gone down the drain. At this moment, even if they could escape back, they wouldn't be able to take control of the army. It wasn't his fault that millions of people died in the outer region World River. However, it was his fault that these 2 million soldiers were all wiped out here. Using the Mirage Mirror to defeat the enemy, there was actually such a method to think that he was so confident before this. His race had paid such a huge price to try to set things up in the cloud world. Who knew that in the end they would get nothing and all of them would be wiped out? Jia Mingluo was stunned. Ming Hui's expression wasn't any better. Dowling Vast Habitat's plan was for the Gantian mountain elites to die here. The Blood Cloud Cavalry wouldn't be able to return to Donglin. However, if Zhong Shou's army in Huizhou Island wasn't damaged at all, he also had 1 million more elite troops. Then, what should they do next? His face flushed red, his eyes flashing with a complicated expression. He was both shocked and fearful. Using the Mirage Mirror to defeat the enemy, why didn't he think about that? He observed Zhong Shou's army for several months, but because he was worried about alerting the enemy and startling the Monster King, he didn't go deep in. He didn't know that the enemy had a way to defeat the enemy. A trace of regret faintly appeared in her heart, but shortly after, her eyes were filled with viciousness. Looking forward, only Zhong Shou's aura was getting stronger and stronger. King Path energy? Minghui just took a look and knew the reason. After this victory, Zhong Shou could swallow the entire Huizhou. The so-called King Path martial arts was the heart of a country, the strength of a country gathered. At this moment, not only did Gantian Mountain not show signs of collapsing, but the strength of the country increased. The amount of King Qi that could be gathered would naturally increase exponentially. After waiting for a while, Zhong Shou's strength didn't decrease. Instead, it increased his combat strength. Thoughts of retreating rose up in his heart. He was struggling between taking a risk and retreating. Shortly after, Minghui made a decision in his heart. Attack, kill. They were already enemies. If they didn't attack now, they wouldn't have a chance in the future. Moreover, as long as Zhong Shou died here, they could still cause Gantian Mountain to collapse. The moment he said this, a sword light that was gathered to the extreme instantly landed in the direction of Zhong Shou, following which was the second and third point, condensing the sword energy to the extreme. Resonating with each other, each sword light would increase the strength of the sword by a little. 7 directions intersecting with one another. At this moment, Minghui also slashed out. The green sword light turned into thousands of shadows, totally blocking off Zhong Shou's path of retreat. Jia Mingluo didn't wait for Minghui to call out. His face sunk as he slashed down with a heavy knife. Numerous red lightning bolts surged through the air. That red lightning knife intent was filled with endless grievances and hatred. Today, even if he worked with these people that he didn't care about, he was going to slay Zhong Shou under his knife. Only by slicing him into 10,000 pieces could he vent this hatred. So what if they won? If the 9 of them worked together, within 3 strikes, they would definitely end his life. If it was him, he wouldn't be able to escape death either. Zhong Shou was still smiling, that ruby necklace was still floating in the air. like he was using all his strength to try to fall down once more. However, there was a power that caused him to float in the air. The red glow became more and more eye-catching. As for the sword in Zhong Shou's hand, a black dot slowly appeared at the tip of the sword. It was extremely black, twisting all the light around and sucking it over. At this moment, Zhong Shou spat out a furious roar. One origin darkness. In the blink of an eye, endless darkness engulfed this isolated miniature space. Chapter 674. The darkness that swallowed the heaven and earth spread out along with the sword. The entire small space was instantly covered in darkness. It was different from the darkness from before. Not only was he unable to see anything, there was not even the slightest bit of light, nor was there any sound. The spiritual sense that the people spread out was twisted and sucked away. All of his 6 senses had been completely cut off. Outside of their bodies, it was chaos. Minghui's pupils constricted. What sword technique was this? What cultivation technique was this? He couldn't sense where Zhong Shou's true body was. The sword in his hand stabbed out instinctively. It covered where Zhong Shou was originally at. However, the energy and sword energy were like a clay ox entering the ocean. There was no sound at all. All the sword light stabbed into the air. It gave one a feeling of emptiness. In this darkness, one felt really uneasy and anxious. A thousandth of a second later, the darkness in front of him slowly dissipated. In Minghui's eyes, one could vaguely see a glimmer of light. Thus, he eagerly searched for Zhong Shou's track. However, when the scenes in front of him entered his eyes, he was totally stunned. Zhong Shou was still standing there perfectly fine, like from start to finish. He hadn't moved at all. However, out of the 7 true martial swordsmen who laid out the true martial 7-point formation, 2 of them were nowhere to be seen. They weren't totally gone, there was still a small section of their feet that was flying down. At the cut area, blood was still seeping out. There were also 2 true martial swords which were left with just a few pieces. Not only the 2 of them, but even the sword in his hand was the same. It was a section shorter out of nowhere. The cut area was really smooth. There were no edges at all, like it was born like that. Looking opposite, he saw Prince Jiamingluo's knife. Similarly, for no reason at all, a section broke off. What was going on? How did these 2 true martial swordsmen die? Minghui's eyes were filled with shock and confusion. On the other side, Zhong Shou hollered furiously, shaking the void. One origin white. After the black hole Dharma, it was the white hole sword. His chest was filled with rage. He could allow this Taoist to stand by and do nothing, but he would never allow him to stab him in the back. None of the 11 people here today would be able to escape from his sword. In the blink of an eye, boundless brilliance blossomed from the longsword. In the blink of an eye, it covered the entire space. The light was brighter than the sun and hotter than lava. The boundless true yang fire spread out in all directions. The blazing white light once again blocked their 6 senses. Just looking at it would burn one's eyes. All he could see was whiteness. Everything was repelled and pushed away. The spiritual sense that had spread out was distorted once again. Minghui could only vaguely feel that it was mixed within the white light. There were also several extremely sharp sword qis. One of them belonged to him. The rest came from the 7 true martial swordsmen. Even Jiamingluo's scarlet lightning saber energy was within. Without even thinking, Minghui had already drawn her sword. Pretty much crazily, she formed heavy sword shadows in front of her. The aura in her body surged out like a flood. It turned into sword energy and locked down the space in front of her. Her heart was filled with shock and fear. How was there such a terrifying sword technique in this world? Such a strong cultivation technique? It was obviously endless peace, unlimited light. The sword in his hand felt several heavy strikes. They were all extremely sharp and strong, causing the heavy sword shadows that he slashed out to scatter like they weren't there at all. It was tough to block. The energy that was like flames pierced into his body. His flesh and blood exploded and his organs were burning. It caused him to scoff out several times. That blazing white brilliance also disappeared in a flash, only an instant later. Minghui's vision returned back to normal. He heard a human voice once more. It was Prince Jia Mingluo's heart-wrenching scream. Looking in the direction of the voice, they saw an incomplete black shadow that had turned into a ball of black light and was flying away in a sorry state. If one didn't look closely, one wouldn't be able to recognize that this was Jia Mingluo who was so majestic just now. At this moment, the black wings that could stretch out hundreds of feet had already disappeared. His body was festering and one could see his bones. There was a shocking hole in his chest. His aura was really weak and he was obviously heavily injured and not far from death. Minghui was slightly startled. She then looked around her. Out of the 5 remaining true martial swordsmen, there were 2 less. This time they didn't suddenly disappear. Instead, their bodies exploded into a ball of flesh and blood. Minghui totally lost the ability to think at this moment. The plan that he set up for this monster king failed just like that? It was really clean, just 2 swords. It caused 4 true martial swordsmen to fall one after another. The true martial sword formation that he had high hopes for instantly collapsed. Experts like him and Jia Mingluo were also heavily injured. At this moment, they were unable to use any energy at all. Those few swords had destroyed a large portion of his meridians and life force. Till now, he still didn't know what was going on with the sword technique ability that Zhong Shou used. He also didn't know what kind of Tao and laws were involved in those 2 swords. He only felt that the light was unlimited and the darkness was endless. It was really mysterious and majestic. It was definitely close to the source of the world, like it was the beginning of the world and the end of the universe. It was really overbearing and strong, totally suppressing his martial path. However, how was that possible? This person was really invincible in the world. He thought that he had seen through Lin Fan's strength, but in the end, he noticed that Lin Fan still had trump cards that he couldn't block at all. He had totally lost. He had lost in such a tragic manner. After those 2 swords, Zhong Shou was still standing in the air. The true qi and soul power in his body were pretty much used up by those 2 swords, but he didn't care at all. The killing trap was broken. At this moment, no one could hurt him. The light-containing pellet continued to expand and contract in his energy ocean. In just a few breaths, Zhong Shou's chakra meridians had recovered by 5%. He looked coldly at Jia Mingluo, who had broken the barrier and was trying his best to escape. As expected, the One Origin White Sword wasn't able to kill this Night Demon Prince in one strike. Just now, he used the One Origin Black Sword to swallow the power of the true martial 7-part sword formation and then used the White Sword to release it. A large portion of the power was directed toward Jia Mingluo. However, even then, it only caused him to be heavily injured. He was just a step away from dying, but after all, he hadn't died yet. Scoffing coldly, Zhong Shou wasn't in a rush to chase. With a single slash, the sword light transformed into a dragon. 1,000 feet away, the remaining 4 true martial swordsmen were instantly sliced apart by this peerlessly sharp platinum dragon sword, along with their swords. Without the true martial 7 points formation, the 4 of them were only initial spirit realm cultivators at the end of the day, and they'd been severely injured. At this moment, in front of him, they were like ants. Even if he didn't use the strength of this country, just the spirit and martial paths who had both reached grade 9, he could use the spirit and martial arts merger technique to win. After slicing off the heads of the 4 people, Zhong Shou's sword light turned once more, splitting into tens of millions of sword images which covered Minghui's body. Minghui's eyes were filled with death and despair. he instinctively raised up a ball of green sword light which broke into the sword shadows. However, a series of chi-chi sounds could be heard. Under the heavy pressure, the sword light was instantly shattered into thousands of pieces. Next, his arm and body were all sliced by the spiral sword shadow. Like a meat grinder, he was sliced into thousands of blood-colored pieces which scattered all over. Even his soul wasn't able to escape, being sliced into pieces and sucked into the nameless sword. At this moment, the Taoist who was holding the falling sky star-sinking disk in his hand and using all his strength to seal this heaven realm was shocked, and his face was completely pale. Although the two of them weren't willing to come, they thought that Minghui would definitely win. However, they didn't expect that the battle would end like this. The Night Demon army collapsed and Gantian Mountain won. Minghui died under Zhong Shou's sword. The 7 true martial swordsmen all died one by one. Prince Jia Mingluo also fled in defeat. A sure-kill situation was so weak and amusing under Zhong Shou's sword. In the blink of an eye, only the two of them were left standing alone in this isolated space. Not far away, 10 miles away, was the demon-like teen whose killing intent didn't decrease at all. The two of them exchanged glances with one another, their eyes filled with fear and terror. The yellow-shirt Taoist was the first to bow his head. I am Xiantong Taoist Fanyan, I am the sect leader. Today, I was forced by the vast Habitat Taoist faction and had no choice. Ruler, please calm down. I am willing to ask the outer region elders for instructions. My Xiantong sect is willing to serve ruler. Zhong Shou couldn't help but laugh when he heard that. His laughter was filled with self-mocking intent. To reconcile with the Taoist faction, he couldn't make enemies everywhere. He had such a thought in his heart. However, at this moment, he knew that he was too naive. Since the Taoist faction had such plans, then how could he not take revenge? Since they weren't willing to reconcile, then they would fight. Under Zhong Shou's rule, he would wipe out the Taoist faction. He was too lazy to listen to what he had to say. Using the power of the nameless sword, his dried-up soul ocean was instantly filled with green flames. A black light shot out from his finger, crossing dozens of miles of space before exploding. The black light spread out and the Xiantong sect leader couldn't dodge at all. He was totally swallowed by the black light. He wasn't even able to cry out before his soul was wiped out and he died. The purple-shirt Taoist was slightly shocked when he saw that. He didn't hesitate anymore, abandoning the falling space star-sinking disk and raising up a flying shuttle to try to tear open space and escape. Zhong Shou's sword was a little faster. It pierced over, along with the person and the shuttle. They were all smashed into pieces in the void. Out of the 11 of them, half of them had been killed. Only one was left. Zhong Shou squinted and looked into the distance. A ball of green light flashed. The green light instantly pierced through the outer walls of the void. It swept all around. In just a moment, it found that person's aura. Samuraim's light flashed, the black wings behind his back flapped, and he left the void. Chapter 675. Even after being forced into such a desperate situation, he still managed to win. On a slightly narrow mountain peak of 7 Cloud Mountain, Zhao Yanran muttered in a daze. Only to see that beneath the mountain, in just a moment, tens of thousands of night demons were beheaded. Before this, they could totally crush their opponents, but now they had no way to fight back at all. At this moment, there were numerous corpses at the foot of the mountain, blood flowing like a river. Although those grade 4 night demons were swiftly fleeing towards the east, under the blazing sun, they weren't as nimble as before. At this moment their situation was really bad. In her eyes, they were not far from death. Zhong Yuan's 300,000 cavalry had split into 3 paths. They pierced forwards, directly blocking off the escape paths of these night demons. Even if they could escape, where could they escape to? East of here was the Cloud Ocean. The only path to the west was under the control of Gantian Mountain. At this moment it was totally destroyed. The only difference was whether they died early or late. At this moment, Xian Yunlan was playing the zither. It was the Qin king breaking the formation music. The surging zither music spread all around the foot of the mountain. At this moment, seeing the army below slowly leave the area that her zither music could reach, she stopped. Her 10 fingers were covered in fresh blood. During this night, every few minutes, she would play a song, her voice spreading tens of miles. The peaceful God-purifying song could heal internal injuries. The Qin king breaking the formation music could stir up one's fighting spirit and raise morale. She knew that the effects of the zither music were really small. However, even if the energy in her body dried up, she wasn't willing to give up. She was only willing to do her best for Zhongshou. At this moment, hearing Zhao Yanran's words, Xian Yunlan instantly giggled. "You won and you aren't happy? I remember that since yesterday you have been worried for a night. Great Senior Master is really smart and has so many generals helping him. How would he be forced into a corner?" Zhao Yanran scoffed coldly. In terms of worry, this Xian Yunlan wasn't below her. However, he didn't retort. His eyes were a little misty as he looked towards the east. Using the mirage to defeat the enemy, that woman's brain is actually not bad. He had underestimated her. That guy's eyes are really sharp. He smiled. After today's battle, can our great senior master be considered the overlord of the east of the Cloud Continent? Xian Yunlan was stunned. Then, she became silent and sank into deep thought. In just a moment, he understood Zhao Yanran's intention. The location of Huizhou Island was extremely important. It was less than 19,000 miles away from the central continent, and the South Wind Cloud Continent to the south was similarly only 18,000 miles away. If it was a fast boat, it would only take 3 to 5 days to arrive. Within 30,000 miles, out of the 12 islands, there were 3 large islands surrounding the area. In ancient times, the Earth domain was equivalent to the land of the 6 continents. If one wanted to increase the area, it would be equivalent to an entire Donglin Cloud continent. Moreover, they were all rich in minerals and products. At this moment, most of them were in chaos and many cities rose up. Thinking about it, if Zhongshou was willing, no one in the entire east of the Cloud Continent could stop him. Using the strength of wiping out the Night Demon army, in just a few years, he would be able to bring these few large islands under his rule. He couldn't help but feel enlightened. This Gantian mountain had unknowingly become a huge tree that supported the heavens. Zhao Yanran smiled. I remember the south of the Central Cloud Continent. There are also dozens of Nanman countries that have close relationships with our Tsang Xingdao. Zhongshou is so strong, who knows what the elders in the sect will choose. The Central Cloud Continent was extremely vast, and even the Taishang couldn't bring all the regions under their rule. At this moment, in the southeast, there were dozens of states that were outside of their rule. There were many experts there. However, rather than calling it a Nanman country, it was more like a barbarian tribe. There were many tribes and the experts could make them submit. If they were weak, they could only submit. They were called the South Barbarians. It had a little of the tribal chiefs ruling together in the ancient times, but it was much crueler. Between the tribes, there were endless killing and fighting. When they fought for power, it was often really bloody. Tsang Xingdao could only interfere in such chaotic places. During these 10,000 years, he had controlled some tribes. What was amusing was that Tsang Xingdao's 3 sects and 6 schools all wanted to try the equal path. However, in the end, it was a mess and they were forced to give up. This caused many disciples to be filled with despair and focus on cultivation. In the end, they came to the conclusion that the South Barbarians weren't smart and weren't suitable for this equal path. Ancestor Shizi's path could only be completed in places where the people of the Central Cloud Continent were prosperous. Hence, during these 2,000 years, the 3 sects and 6 schools all slowly stopped. Hence, their power increased greatly. Many barbarian tribes relied on Tsang-Xing-Dao and the other sections. However, the South Barbarian country was under the control of Tsang-Xing-Dao. Zhong Shou showed off such an invincible aura, his army's strength and aura covering a world. It was tough to say what choice the sect leaders of Tsang-Xing-Dao would make, overlord of the southeast. Such a thought instinctively flashed across Xian Yuanlan's mind. Her eyes constricted as she waved her hand and played the zither, giving out a soft ding-dong. The crisp zither music caused her heart to instantly calm down. This matter isn't something the two of us can interfere in. Moreover, it is too early to talk about this. It was indeed a little early. Zhong Shou needed at least a few years to take the surrounding few islands under his rule. At this moment, a strong country rose up in South Wind Cloud Continent. The ruler of this country was also a fierce and ambitious person. He definitely wouldn't easily submit to Zhong Shou. To attack the southeast and step into the Cloud Continent, the Central Cloud Empire would definitely be wary. The Central Dynasty would definitely be wary. Many aristocratic families and sects in the Central Continent wouldn't sit still and do nothing. The current Zhong Shou and Gantian Mountain still didn't have enough strength to deal with them. However, at this moment, Zhong Shou's aura was already formed. He had Renbua and Zhang Huai, and he had Qiu Wei and Hu Qianhou, who could take charge of an area. How long would it take for that day to arrive? Looking down at the Shura killing field, top generals, unparalleled commanders. At this moment, there were more than 5 people in the cloud world who had the ability to suppress Gantian Mountain. However, in terms of battle formations, only the Great Shang Empire was a level higher than the Great Shang Empire. That's true. Zhao Yinran shook her head and thought back to when they first met. She remembered that Zhong Shou was really casual and carefree, sitting on the carriage. At that time, she didn't think that this lazy fellow would be so arrogant. Comparing the achievements of the two of them, she really couldn't take it. Then, she found it weird and looked towards Jingyin, asking curiously, "What are you looking at?" "It's been almost 15 minutes. This nun who returned to the secular world often didn't say a word, so there was nothing weird about it. However, since 15 minutes ago, Zhong Shou and Jia Minglua's bodies suddenly disappeared. She just looked at the sky and didn't shift her gaze. Even when the hot light shone down and the situation below changed, Jingyin didn't take a look. "Are you worried about Zhong Shou? Could it be that you've fallen for that guy too?" Zhao Yinran understood and thought that she had guessed what Jingyin was thinking. She smiled. "No wonder. That fellow has the 9-tailed skyfox bloodline. Jingyin, you are so pure, so it would be weird if you didn't fall for him. Don't worry, that fellow has many hidden cards. It might be a little tough to win against those people, but it won't be so easy to keep his life." In her heart, she really didn't worry, especially after the huge victory. Gantian country's situation was settled. Zhong Shou's King Path martial arts would at least be 20% stronger. Looking out, one could see that Zhong Yuan and thousands of blood cloud cavalry rising into the air and stepping towards the black veil. That sealed space was on the verge of breaking. Jingyin's face flushed red and she lowered her head. She didn't like him. As long as she could complete the important task of teaching Zhao Yanran into the Buddhist faction, she would return to the Buddhist faction. She was prepared to return to the sect and accompany her there. However, shortly after, a thick doubt appeared in his eyes. Just now, she clearly felt that within the sealed space, there was an aura that made her heart race. She didn't know who it came from, but she felt that it was really important to her, even more important than her life. Suddenly, Xian Yinlan's voice rang out once more. "What a bright star!" Zhao Yanran and Jingyin were slightly distracted as they looked out once more, only to see that in the north, a star was shining brightly, extremely clear and eye-catching. Although it was noon and the blazing sun was up in the sky, it was unable to cover its glow. Zhao Yanran recognized that it was Alcade breaking the army. She could feel that the starlight was shining together with the golden-armored woman on the peak of another mountain not far away. Zhao Yanran couldn't help but pout to show her disdain. Wasn't Alcade a famous commander? Outside of the chaotic void barrier, Jia Mingluo was fleeing swiftly between the Spirit River and the Space Gap. His body was shaking and he looked really panicked. At this moment, his body couldn't be described simply as haggard. He remembered that a few months ago when he stepped into the cloud world, although he wasn't in high spirits, he was still filled with ambition. However, in less than 3 months, he had no choice but to flee from the cloud world in such a pitiful manner. All the energy in his body, all the potential was forcefully squeezed out by him to increase his speed. Although he didn't use his spiritual sense to look, he could sense something behind him. That extremely dangerous aura, which made him feel incomparably terrified, was getting closer and closer. Till now, he still didn't understand. How could that person slash out such a sword? It was even more vast and stronger than the enemy of the night demon race, Dari Rulai. Pretty much endless light, unlimited light. Jiaming Lua's eyes flashed with a thread of hope and joy. Although he lost badly in the battle today, his limbs were broken and his 2 wings were destroyed. However, as long as he brought back the news today, he might have a chance to rise up once more. Enemy of the night demon race, it wasn't his fault. The saint race, his father definitely wouldn't allow this person to continue living in the world. He definitely wouldn't allow another enemy to rise up in the various worlds. As long as this news was confirmed, he would still be one of the 8 princes who could inherit the throne. To be continued. Chapter 676. Gliding rapidly in the long and narrow Spirit River, Jia Mingluo inhaled and exhaled a vast amount of spirit energy in the area. His severed limbs were already showing signs of healing. The broken bat wings on his back spread out once more. This was the natural healing ability of the night demon race. If he didn't know that now wasn't the time to heal his injuries, then, in just a few dozen breaths, his external injuries would be healed. This place wasn't far from the World River and in just a few minutes, he would be able to reach it, although he had gone all in on this trip to the Cloud World. However, there were still some people left within the World River. A full 100,000 troops and dozens of Grade 9 experts to guard the broken pieces of the ancient wood giant boat. As long as he was there, even Zhong Shou wouldn't be able to do anything to him. At least he would be able to escape safely. However, just as joy flashed in his eyes, a silver light flashed in his eyes. A streak of silver light suddenly streaked across the sky and appeared in the range of his spiritual perception. Flying knife. In just an instant, he had already recognized what it was. Jiaming Lua's eyes were filled with shock. He remembered the first time they clashed, the flying knife that changed unpredictably. He couldn't even dodge it when he was at his peak, much less now. He changed directions several times and as expected, the knife shadow chased after him like a shadow. Although there were tens of millions of layers of red astral lightning behind him, they were unable to block it at all. The extremely sharp knife intent forcefully pushed aside the layers of red lightning. Then, the knife body sped up and pierced through his chest once more. Blood splattered everywhere as Jia Mingluo suddenly let out a furious roar that seemed to contain extreme hatred and fear. He didn't care about the pain. Blood mist exploded out from the wounds on his limbs. Even some parts that were perfectly fine exploded. They turned into threads of strong essence energy that flowed in his body. It caused Jia Mingluo's movement speed to suddenly increase by several times. However, that sense of danger was still getting closer and closer to him. He could vaguely feel that a wolf filled with murderous intent was firmly locking onto him. He couldn't shake it off or escape. His speed was neither fast nor slow, and he wasn't anxious at all. However, he continued to follow closely behind him. Jia Mingluo suddenly recalled what Zhong Shou had said to him. If I were you, I would flee right now. It would be best if you leave the cloud world and go somewhere I can't find. However, was there anywhere nearby that Zhong Shou couldn't find? Thinking back to the close to 1,000,000 people who died under 7 Cloud Mountain, Jia Mingluo's chest was dripping blood. In another 200 breaths they would reach the World River. However, at this moment in his eyes it was already out of reach. Another streak of silver light streaked across the sky and chased after them from behind. Just as Jia Mingluo wanted to dodge, a sharp aura blocked in front of him. A claw chain suddenly broke through several layers of spatial barriers and grabbed at him from afar. Was it Zhong Shou? Jia Mingluo felt that it wasn't right. Although this person's aura was strong, he wasn't as domineering as Zhong Shou. However, the moment such a thought flashed across his mind, his body was firmly captured by the flying claw. Threads of true power that made people feel extremely cold invaded his 4 limbs and hundreds of meridians, causing him to be unable to move and unable to struggle. Only now did he see the face of the person who had captured him. Jia Mingluo was slightly startled. The person in front of him was actually a girl. The 30,000-foot lightning wings flapped as Zhong Shou stepped in the layers of space. Each time the lightning wings flapped, it would use an extremely strong power to rip open space. This allowed him to get closer to Jia Mingluo. He maintained a calm and steady tempo, maintaining enough true qi and soul power in case of any accident. He also didn't allow Jia Mingluo to escape. However, when the second cloud flame flying knife shot out, Zhong Shou was slightly stunned. The 6-god flying knife never missed. If one didn't die, one would be injured. This time was no exception. Sensing from afar, this knife should have already injured Jia Mingluo. However, why did this person's aura suddenly stop? Was he in despair and gave up on escaping? With this person's personality, he wasn't any weaker than him, so this shouldn't be the case. Unable to figure it out, Zhong Shou shook his head. The black wings behind his back flapped once more, and he appeared in the space where Jia Mingluo's aura was. Zhong Shou's expression turned serious as he looked opposite with his brow raised. He saw a person standing in the void. She held a chain in her hand, and at the end of it was a flying claw that captured a person. It was Jia Mingluo. This was an 18-year-old girl. Her body was extremely graceful, bright eyes and white teeth. Her skin was like jade. She was really outstanding. She wore a plain dress and gave off a cold aura. Her brows were filled with an icy intent that couldn't be melted. At this moment, she was slightly curious as she looked towards him. It was her? Samuraim's eyes constricted. He only felt his breathing stop and his heart tremble. The figure that he could not forget for a long time on Xing Mountain, the figure that he yearned for day and night, suddenly appeared in front of him today. So, there was actually such a person in this era, speaking of which, this woman was suppressing the evil that entered the world from the outer region. For such a huge matter like the night demon army descending, how could she not come? Or maybe a long time ago, she had been waiting at the side for a chance. His heart jumped, but Zhong Shou immediately thought about Xianyuan Iran. Then, his raging heart slowly calmed down. Since he already had someone he loved in this life, then he didn't need to hope for anything else. This was the person he looked forward to in his last life. Even if he could do it once more, he wouldn't regret it. Thinking about Iran, his chest instantly felt warm. That feeling of loss and sadness also decreased by a large amount. Then, his eyes landed on the ground beneath her feet. Above her bare feet, a silver chain full of barbs could be seen. It pierced through her flesh and bones, firmly locking her jade-like feet. He also knew that there were countless restrictions on the woman's body, causing her to suffer endless pain and torment at every moment. That pain was definitely not as bad as a few years ago when his meridians were twisting and clashing. It was enough to make one go crazy. Pity flashed across his eyes as Zhong Shou took in a deep breath, his expression returning to normal. Even if they weren't fated just because of the last life, he had to do something for her. He definitely wasn't willing for her to be trapped in Qing Mountain. However, at this moment it wasn't the right time. He expressionlessly swept Jia Mingluo, who couldn't move. Although this person had lost his ability to fight back, he was still on his last breaths and hadn't died yet. Zhong Shou's eyes flashed and then he looked at the teen. Fairy, did you come from Qing Mountain? Leng Daiyu, Fairy Leng? The teen was startled, like she was surprised that Zhong Shou knew her name. She nodded her head slightly and then shook her head. She was indeed called Leng Daiyu, but she wasn't Fairy Leng. Zhong Shou smiled. The black lightning wings on his back continued to spread out. They covered 32,000 feet in the air, flames surging into the heavens. This Jia Mingluo is my enemy. Can you give him up? If so, I will be really grateful. Leng Daiyu frowned slightly, using the chain to carry Jia Mingluo. She took a step back and a wary expression appeared on her face. She felt that it wasn't appropriate. After all, she was the one who snatched food from the mouth of a tiger. Thus, she explained, it is useful. She only said 2 words, but Zhong Shou knew what she meant. Jia Mingluo was most probably useful to that person. However, this night demon prince knew too much. Zhong Shou definitely wouldn't allow him to leave the cloud world alive. He knew that with her personality, she had no choice. Even if he tried to negotiate with her, it would be useless. Then, he could only fight. Under her protection, he would forcefully kill Jia Mingluo. He mocked himself in his heart. This was the first time he was meeting this person who he had been thinking about and feeling down about for a period of time. However, they were going to meet with weapons. However, at this moment, there was no room for negotiation between the two of them. His hand pressing on the nameless sword, Zhong Shou's sword intent, which had faded, rose up once more. His voice also became calm and emotionless as he said indifferently, "This person is useful to Fairy, but to me, he must die. Since we can't come to an agreement, then we can only fight." Jia Mingluo was in despair and knew that even if he fell into the hands of this woman, he wouldn't have a good ending. When he heard this, he burst out laughing. "You want to kill him? What one origin darkness, one origin white, what a good sword technique. What a great ability. If you Zhong Shou grows, you will be our enemy. However, I really want to see how long you can hide it from us." Speaking up to hear, his heart suddenly stirred as he thought of something. Unlimited light, endless darkness. He remembered that a few years ago, the Mahavairakana of the Buddhist sect had changed the 3 words immeasurable light to boundless light in his teachings. This was why he was the enemy of the night demons and they paid special attention to him. He also knew that the Buddhist faction had one more Buddhist venerable, unlimited beginning and end Buddha. The temples of some worlds already had statues of this Buddha, but they didn't know what he looked like. While they were waiting for him to take his position, unlimited beginning and end, it was him. Speaking of which, those 2 swords did have the meaning of the end of the universe, the beginning of the world. Jia Mingluo's heart trembled and his face was filled with shock. Right as he was about to speak, Zhong Shou slashed out. The dragon shadow behind him roared. The sword in his hand also transformed into a white dragon shape as it rushed towards the spot where the young lady was standing. Platinum dragon sword, slash. Leng Daiyu frowned, the green bamboo sword behind her flew up. She also used the sword cultivator technique to lay out thousands of sword lights in front of her, locking down the area. At the same time, she took out a small silver shield. As expected, Zhong Shou's sword turned from real to illusionary, turning into the mysterious dragon sword and striking right at Jia Mingluo. Leng Daiyu's small shield blocked in front of the mysterious dragon sword. With a loud explosion, the sword energy shook and dissipated. Within the energy glow, there was a silver light. With a turn, it went around the small silver shield and pierced through Jiamingluo's brain. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.